Hey everyone, tonight we're journeying deep into the most mysterious, haunting, and utterly terrifying secrets that our world's deserts hold. From ancient structures that shouldn't exist to travelers who vanish without explanation. From lost cities buried beneath shifting sands to sounds so horrifying they've kept scientists awake at night. Deserts cover about 33% of our planet's land surface, yet many remain largely unexplored or understood. That means there's a vast, silent world out there waiting in the scorching heat and freezing nights, filled with mysteries that would make your worst nightmares seem like pleasant bedtime stories. So before we trek into these sandy expanses together, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy venturing into the unknown with me. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's brave enough to join us on these midnight journeys into the barren wilderness. Now dim the lights, maybe grab a warm blanket, and let's ease in to tonight's exploration of the desert's darkest secrets. When you think of deserts, you might picture golden sand dunes, shimmering heat waves, and perhaps a cactus or two standing solemnly in the distance. But tonight, we're going somewhere else entirely. We're going to places where the sun beats down with merciless intensity, where temperatures fluctuate wildly between blistering days and freezing nights, and where things exist that human civilization seems to have forgotten about. The desert isn't just sand and rock. It's a harsh, unforgiving alien landscape that exists right here on our planet, filled with phenomena so bizarre they look like they were designed by someone having a fever dream. A realm where mirages distort reality, where ancient civilizations vanished without trace, and where the very landscape itself seems to shift and change like a living thing. Picture this. You're standing alone in the middle of a vast desert on a moonless night. The sand stretches endlessly in every direction, a sea of darkness beneath a canopy of stars, so bright and numerous they seem artificial. But all around you, hiding in plain sight, are dangers and mysteries, so profound that even our most seasoned explorers return with more questions than answers. And in that stillness, things are moving, things are watching, things are waiting. The desert doesn't care about your fears or your comfort zone. It operates by rules so alien to our water-dependent minds that even our most advanced science struggles to understand its patterns. Out there in the most remote expanses, the temperature can swing from 120 degrees Fahrenheit during the day to below freezing at night. It would be like alternating between a scorching sauna and a walk-in freezer every 12 hours. And yet life persists there. Not just survives, persists. Creatures that have evolved to go without water for months, that withstand temperatures that would kill a human in hours, that exist in a world of extreme conditions and scarcity. They've adapted to environments so harsh that they might as well be living on another planet entirely. Some of them burrow deep beneath the sand during the day, emerging only in the cool darkness of night. Others have evolved specialized organs to store water for months at a time, like living canteens drifting through the barren landscape. But here's what really keeps desert researchers up at night. We keep finding new things out there, new species, new archaeological sites, new phenomena that challenge everything we thought we knew about history and life on Earth. Every desert expedition brings back evidence of things that defy conventional explanation, and for every new discovery, 10 more questions arise. The desert has been keeping secrets for thousands of years, and it's not about to give them up easily. It guards its mysteries jealously, hidden beneath shifting sands and blistering heat. But tonight, we're going to trek across that alien landscape and explore some of the most spine-tingling, sleep-disrupting, absolutely fascinating mysteries that lurk in the arid expanses. Because if you think you know what's scary, wait until you hear about what's been hiding in the most desolate parts of our planet's deserts, sometimes in plain sight all this time. And the really unsettling part? We're just beginning to scratch the surface. Let's start our journey in a place that sounds like it came straight out of a horror movie, the Rub al Khali, or Empty Quarter, located on the Arabian Peninsula. This sand sea is the largest continuous sand desert in the world, covering an area larger than France. To put that in perspective, if you were to stand at one edge of the Empty Quarter, you wouldn't be able to see across to the other side, even with the most powerful telescope. It simply stretches beyond the horizon in every direction. The Empty Quarter isn't just vast, it's alien. The heat there is so intense that it can cause hallucinations. The sand dunes tower hundreds of feet high, and water is so scarce that a person can die of dehydration within hours. It's as close to visiting another planet as you can get without leaving Earth. And yet, incredibly, impossibly, people have ventured into this wasteland for thousands of years. In 1932, the explorer Bertram Thomas became one of the first Westerners to cross the Empty Quarter, a journey that many considered suicidal. What he and subsequent explorers found changed our understanding of human history forever. Even in that scorching emptiness, with temperatures regularly exceeding 130 degrees Fahrenheit, they found evidence of ancient human habitation. Actual settlements had once existed in what is now one of the most inhospitable environments on Earth. But that was just the beginning. In the decades since, as technology has improved, and we've been able to use more sophisticated equipment to study the region, we've discovered that the Empty Quarter wasn't always empty. We're talking about a place that once had lakes and grasslands, that supported entire civilizations, that was green and fertile before climate change turned it into the barren wasteland we see today. There are fossilized riverbeds down there, hidden beneath the sand, testament to ancient waterways that once flowed freely through what is now one of the driest places on Earth. There are remnants of settlements buried beneath the dunes, some of them so old that they predate written history. And then there are the things that move, the things that watch, the things that have been reported by Bedouin travelers for centuries, but dismissed as mere superstition by the scientific community. Desert travelers speak of the ghosts of the sands, mysterious figures seen at a distance that vanish when approached. They tell stories of entire caravans that have disappeared without trace, swallowed by the desert as completely as if they had never existed. And they whisper about strange lights that dance across the dunes at night. Lights that can't be explained by any known natural phenomenon. Lights that seem to beckon travelers to follow them deeper into the emptiness. It's like something out of a ghost story, except these accounts come from hardened desert dwellers who know the empty quarter better than anyone else on Earth. But perhaps the most unsettling thing about the Robo-Kali isn't what we found there, it's what we haven't found. Every expedition brings back artifacts that don't fit neatly into our understanding of history, structures that shouldn't exist in such a hostile environment, evidence that challenges our timeline of human civilization. Scientists estimate that we've explored less than 5% of the empty quarter thoroughly, which means that 95% of this vast desert remains largely unknown to us. What else is out there in those unexplored dunes? What kinds of civilizations rose and fell in isolation, developing in ways that our modern minds can't even imagine? What ancient secrets are buried beneath the endless sand? And perhaps most unsettling of all, what if some of those secrets weren't meant to be disturbed? The empty quarter is like a window into an alien world that exists right here on our own planet. It's a reminder that Earth still holds mysteries that can make our most creative fiction seem tame by comparison. And every time we think we've understood the strangest thing the desert has to offer, it surprises us with something even more bizarre, even more impossible, even more likely to make you lie awake at night, wondering what else might be lurking in the sands below. As we venture deeper into the desert's mysteries, we encounter something that has puzzled scientists and explorers for centuries: the phenomenon of desert voices. Picture this: you're trekking across a remote desert landscape where no other humans have passed for days, perhaps weeks, and suddenly you hear what sounds unmistakably like whispers, conversations, or even singing coming from the air around you. This isn't some rare occurrence reported by a single delirious traveler. These experiences have been documented by explorers, military personnel, and indigenous desert dwellers across virtually every major desert on Earth. The singing sands, as they're often called, create sounds that range from low humming to high-pitched screams that would make your blood run cold. But unlike the northern lights, which are beautiful and distant, desert voices often feel intensely personal, as if they're speaking directly to you. Many travelers report hearing their own name called out clearly, only to turn and find nothing but empty landscape stretching to the horizon. The Bedouin of the Sahara have long warned about the jinn, or desert spirits that call to travelers, luring them off established paths and deeper into the wasteland where they become hopelessly lost. While modern science explains some of these phenomena as the result of sand granules rubbing against each other or wind passing through certain rock formations, these explanations don't account for the highly specific and seemingly intelligent nature of what many people hear. In the Great Sand Sea of Egypt, the dunes are known to produce a low, resonant booming sound that can continue for several minutes at a time. Locals call these the desert's heartbeat and claim they occur most frequently before major sandstorms, as if the desert itself is warning of approaching danger. Scientists have recorded these sounds and confirmed they exist, but still struggle to explain their timing and pattern, which sometimes seems to defy pure physics. Then there are the whisperers reported by numerous military units stationed in the deserts of Iraq and Afghanistan. Soldiers consistently report hearing voices that sound like whispered conversations in English, not local languages, coming from empty spaces. These reports became so common during certain deployments that psychological evaluations were ordered, only to find the soldiers were otherwise completely sound of mind. But don't let the apparent supernatural nature fool you. These desert voices often serve as important navigational warnings. Indigenous peoples of the Kalahari can interpret subtle changes in the sand sounds to predict weather patterns and even locate hidden water sources beneath the surface. What modern ears might interpret as ghostly whispers, trained desert dwellers recognize as the desert's own communication system. The deep desert is filled with acoustic phenomena that have turned sound into an art form, but not always for harmless reasons. Some of these sounds serve as warnings of approaching danger, while others seem specifically designed to confuse and disorient travelers. There are places in the Atacama Desert where sound carries in such unusual ways that voices can be heard clearly over distances of several miles, creating the impression that someone is standing right beside you when they're actually far away. Others create dead zones where even the loudest shout wouldn't carry more than a few feet, potentially preventing calls for help from reaching companions. And some locations create perfect acoustic mirrors that throw your own voice back at you from unexpected directions, making it seem like someone is mocking or answering you from behind when you're completely alone. And some desert regions produce sound patterns that seem almost maliciously clever, like the followers reported in the Sonoran Desert. Footstep sounds that seem to match your pace exactly, always staying just behind you, never getting closer or farther away, but stopping precisely when you stop, as if something is stalking you just out of sight. But here's where desert acoustics get really unsettling. Sometimes when researchers set up recording equipment in remote desert locations, they capture sound patterns that don't match any known natural phenomenon, voices and noises that seem to appear on the recordings without any visible source. These mystery sounds come through on equipment that was functioning perfectly normally, creating audio patterns that sound almost like fragments of conversation or music, but don't correspond to anything that was physically present. Scientists have theories, of course. Wind patterns, equipment malfunctions, distant human activities carried by unusual atmospheric conditions. But the recordings keep coming back, showing sound patterns that appear organized and purposeful, creating audio that is both beautiful and deeply disturbing at the same time. What if these desert voices aren't just about sand particles and wind currents? What if some of these phenomena represent forms of communication, so ancient or alien that we're only catching fragments, like tuning into a radio frequency that wasn't meant for human ears? The desert whispers with secrets. Literally, every strange sound is a reminder that there's an entire acoustic world out there, complete with its own forms of warning, welcome, and mystery, all happening in realms where humans are merely temporary visitors in a landscape that has existed for millions of years. Now let's talk about something that will make you think twice about taking that relaxing desert road trip: vanishing travelers. Not the fictional kind from horror movies, but real people who have disappeared without explanation while crossing desert regions, leaving behind vehicles and possessions, but no bodies or evidence of what befell them. The desert has a way of swallowing people whole, leaving behind their belongings like sun-bleached markers of their passing. These aren't travelers who died from obvious causes like dehydration or exposure. These are cases where people vanished in circumstances that defy logical explanation. Their vehicles often found in perfect condition, supplies untouched, as if they had simply stepped out for a moment and been erased from existence, leaving no footprints, no blood, no indication of what happened to otherwise prepared and experienced desert visitors. One of the most famous cases is the Death Valley Germans, a family of 4 who disappeared in Death Valley National Park in 1996. Their rented van was found abandoned in a remote area of the park, but despite extensive searches, the family themselves seemed to have vanished into thin air. The extreme heat and harsh conditions of Death Valley meant that searchers expected to find bodies relatively quickly if the family had succumbed to the elements. Yet nothing was found for years. The vehicle showed no signs of mechanical failure, their personal belongings were still inside, and there was no indication of foul play. It was as if they had simply walked away from their vehicle and been swallowed by the desert. What makes this case even more disturbing is that when partial remains were finally discovered years later, they were found miles from the van, in an area that had been thoroughly searched multiple times. How did they get there? Why weren't they found during the initial searches? And what happened to the remaining family members whose remains have never been recovered? Then there's the case of Jim Gray, a renowned computer scientist who went sailing near San Francisco in 2007 and disappeared without a trace. Despite one of the most extensive sea and air searches in U.S. Coast Guard history, no sign of Gray or his boat was ever found. While this occurred at sea rather than in a desert, it demonstrates the mysterious nature of unexplained disappearances in isolated environments. What makes these cases even more disturbing is that modern travelers are equipped with all kinds of safety and communication equipment, GPS tracking, satellite phones, emergency beacons, and detailed maps. Yet something still manages to make people vanish completely, often leaving their survival gear behind untouched. Perhaps even more chilling are the patterns that emerge when you start mapping these disappearances. David Paulides, a former police detective, has documented hundreds of strange disappearances in his Missing 411 series, and while his work focuses primarily on national parks, many of these cases occur in desert or semi-desert regions. The patterns he's identified are deeply unsettling. People who vanish in areas previously searched, clothing found neatly folded when it should be on the missing person's body, and disappearances that occur in clusters, as if something periodically awakens in certain regions and claims human victims. In the Sonoran Desert spanning the U.S.-Mexico border, local legends speak of El Desierto Hambriento, the Hungry Desert, said to periodically claim travelers who venture too far from established paths. What's strange is that statistical analysis of missing persons cases does show periodic spikes in certain regions that don't correlate with increased visitor numbers or extreme weather events. The Australian outback has its own share of mysterious disappearances, perhaps most famously the vanishing of 9-year-old Azaria Chamberlain from a campsite near Uluru in 1980. While her mother was eventually vindicated after being wrongfully convicted of murder, what actually happened to the child remains controversial. The official finding that a dingo took the baby doesn't fully explain the lack of blood evidence or remains, leading some researchers to suggest there are predators in the outback that haven't been officially documented. Even more unsettling are cases where groups vanish together, leaving behind camps or vehicles that show no signs of panic or struggle. In 1995, a group of 5 experienced hikers disappeared in the Cabeza Prieta National Wildlife Refuge, a desert wilderness in Arizona. Their campsite was found intact, with food still in coolers, sleeping bags neatly arranged, and no signs of distress. None of the 5 were ever found, despite extensive searches using tracking dogs and aircraft. The dogs disturbingly refused to follow any scent trails leading away from the camp, behaving as if the hikers had simply vanished into the air. The search team reported that the dogs would circle the perimeter of the camp, whining and appearing confused, unwilling to track in any particular direction. This behavior has been reported in other mysterious desert disappearances as well, suggesting something about these cases confounds even the sensitive noses of trained search dogs. Desert disappearances also often involve strange auditory experiences, reported by the last people to see the missing individuals. Companions or people nearby frequently report hearing unusual sounds just before someone vanishes, sounds described as humming, buzzing, or a wall of noise that seems to envelop an area. After these sound events, people who were present just moments before are simply gone. In 2017, a group of tourists in the Atacama Desert in Chile reported such an experience. According to their account, they heard what sounded like the desert singing, a rising musical tone that seemed to come from all directions at once. When the sound stopped, they realized their guide was missing. Despite being in an open landscape with visibility for miles, he was nowhere to be seen. No trace of him has ever been found. What could possibly explain these patterns? Natural explanations like quicksand, flash floods, or predator attacks fail to account for the lack of evidence, the disappearance of multiple people simultaneously, and the strange circumstances surrounding many cases. More outlandish theories range from secret military activities to paranormal phenomena to openings in the fabric of reality itself, temporary portals that researchers in quantum physics have theoretically proposed could exist. Perhaps the most rational explanation comes from neuroscience. The extreme conditions of deserts, high temperatures, dehydration, and exposure to intense sunlight can cause the human brain to experience various forms of altered consciousness. People suffering from heat exhaustion or the early stages of heat stroke often experience confusion, hallucinations, and irrational behavior. They might wander away from safety, hide themselves in unlikely places, or remove clothing despite the cold desert night. But this explanation fails to account for cases where multiple people disappear simultaneously, or where experienced desert travelers with no signs of distress simply vanish. It also doesn't explain why bodies aren't found when search areas are often open terrain, with few places to hide a human body. The desert seems to collect people, claiming them in ways we still don't understand. For every person who dies from documented causes like dehydration or exposure, there are cases that defy explanation, where people simply step out of our world and into somewhere else. The desert keeps its secrets buried beneath the sand, revealing only enough to remind us that despite all our technology and knowledge, we are still vulnerable to forces we don't fully comprehend. If you're planning a desert trip, the standard safety advice certainly applies. Bring plenty of water, tell someone your plans, stick to marked trails. But perhaps the desert dwellers' additional warnings deserve consideration too. Don't travel alone, don't wander at dusk, and whatever you do, if you hear something calling your name from behind the dunes, don't follow the voice. Let's now explore one of the most fascinating and terrifying aspects of desert mysteries, moving rocks and shifting sands that seem to defy the laws of physics. In certain desert locations around the world, heavy objects move on their own, creating patterns and tracks that science has struggled to explain for decades. The most famous example is the sailing stones of Death Valley's racetrack playa, where rocks weighing up to 700 pounds slide across the flat desert floor, leaving long trails behind them, all without any human intervention. For nearly a century, these moving rocks baffled scientists. The trails showed that some rocks had moved hundreds of feet in straight lines, while others had made perfect 90-degree turns, or even traveled in circles. No one had ever witnessed the rocks moving, adding to the mystery. Local indigenous legends spoke of rocks that came alive at night, dancing across the playa when humans weren't watching. In 2014, researchers finally captured the movement on camera, revealing that a perfect combination of rain, ice, and wind creates the conditions for this seemingly impossible phenomenon. Thin sheets of ice form around the rocks when rainwater freezes on the playa surface, and gentle but persistent winds then push these ice-collared rocks across the muddy ground. But here's where it gets strange. This explanation, while scientifically sound, doesn't account for all the movements observed over the decades. Some rocks have been documented moving uphill against the wind, while others have created patterns that seem almost deliberate, like the formation of geometric shapes when multiple rocks are tracked over time. And despite numerous attempts to recreate the documented movements using the ice collar theory, scientists have been unable to fully replicate some of the more unusual patterns. Even more unsettling are the walking dunes found in certain deserts around the world. These massive sand formations move much faster than conventional dune migration should allow, sometimes advancing up to 100 feet in a single year. In the Namib Desert, star-shaped dunes appear to rotate rather than simply shift with prevailing winds, creating spiral patterns when viewed from above that some researchers have compared to massive fingerprints pressed into the earth. What makes these moving dunes particularly eerie is the sound they sometimes produce. A low, rhythmic rumble that desert dwellers describe as sounding like distant footsteps. In Morocco's Erg Chebi, locals claim the dunes move primarily at night and warn visitors against sleeping too close to the base of large dunes, telling stories of campers who went to sleep beside a dune only to be found buried beneath tons of sand by morning. Scientific explanations for these phenomena usually involve complex interactions between wind patterns, sand composition, and thermal gradients. But these explanations often fail to account for the speed and direction of movement, particularly when dunes appear to move against prevailing wind patterns or in the absence of significant wind. Perhaps most disturbing are the breathing deserts, areas where the sand surface rises and falls in a regular pattern reminiscent of respiration. In parts of the Gobi Desert, researchers have documented sections of desert floor that rise and fall several inches over periods of hours, with no apparent connection to seismic activity or wind patterns. Local Mongolian herders avoid these areas, believing them to be the sleeping places of massive underground creatures. Modern science suggests these movements might be caused by trapped gas pockets or groundwater fluctuations, but measurements of these sites have failed to detect either gas emissions or significant water presence. What's particularly strange is that these breathing areas often form perfect circles or ellipses, geometric shapes that seem too regular to be formed by random natural processes. In Saudi Arabia's Empty Quarter, another movement phenomenon has been documented but rarely discussed in scientific literature: sand rivers. These are narrow, stream-like formations where sand flows continuously in a liquid-like manner, even when surrounding sand is completely still. These sand rivers can flow for days or weeks at a time, creating winding channels through the desert that look remarkably like water streams. Unlike normal sand movement, which requires constant wind to maintain, these sand rivers continue flowing even when the air is completely still. More disturbing still, they often emerge and disappear suddenly, with no apparent trigger or cause. Bedouin guides refer to them as desert bloodstreams, and claim they always lead to sites of ancient settlements or burial grounds, if followed to their source. Scientists who have studied this phenomenon suggest it might involve a combination of electrostatic charges, mineral composition, and microvibrations in the earth, too subtle for humans to feel. But these explanations remain theoretical, as the sand rivers often disappear before they can be properly studied, and their appearance seems impossible to predict. What all these moving desert phenomena share is their apparent violation of how we expect inanimate objects to behave. Rocks shouldn't move without a visible force acting on them. Dunes shouldn't rotate like living things. Sand shouldn't flow like water in the absence of wind or slope. And yet, all these things happen in deserts around the world, captured on camera and documented by reliable witnesses. Perhaps it's this contradiction of our basic expectations about physical reality that makes moving desert features so unsettling. They remind us that even in an age of advanced science and technology, there are still phenomena occurring right on the surface of our planet that we can't fully explain or predict. The desert doesn't just conceal its mysteries beneath the sand. Sometimes it displays them openly, challenging us to make sense of movements that seem to operate according to rules we don't yet understand. And that raises a disturbing question. If seemingly simple physical processes, like rocks moving across a dry lake bed, can remain mysterious for nearly a century despite intensive scientific study, what other desert phenomena might we be completely misunderstanding or failing to notice entirely? The desert moves in ways we're only beginning to comprehend, following patterns that might take centuries more to fully decode, if they can be decoded at all. Deep in the heart of the world's most forbidding deserts lie structures that shouldn't exist. Ancient ruins, mysterious stone arrangements, and architectural anomalies that defy conventional historical timelines. These desert megaliths aren't just puzzling because of their size or construction methods, but because they often appear in locations where no civilization should have been able to thrive, raising profound questions about who built them and why. In the remote reaches of the Sahara Desert, thousands of miles from any water source, explorers have discovered the ruins of advanced settlements with sophisticated irrigation systems, astronomical observatories, and defensive fortifications. These sites, like the lost city of Zerzura, long dismissed as mere legend until satellite imagery confirmed its existence, appear to have housed thousands of people in regions that today couldn't support even a small nomadic band. What's particularly disturbing about these desert ruins is that many show evidence of having been abandoned suddenly and completely. Excavations reveal meals left uneaten, tools dropped in mid-use, and no signs of conflict, disease, or natural disaster that might explain why the inhabitants fled. It's as if entire populations simply walked away from their homes simultaneously, leaving everything behind. Even more puzzling are the massive stone structures found in the Arabian desert that predate known civilizations in the region by thousands of years. The most famous of these are the desert kites, enormous stone arrangements visible only from the air, spanning miles across the landscape. Originally thought to be ancient hunting traps, new evidence suggests many are aligned with astronomical phenomena with such precision that they would have required advanced mathematical knowledge to construct. What makes these structures particularly unsettling is their age. Carbon dating of organic material found beneath the stones suggests some were built over 9,000 years ago, thousands of years before the invention of writing or the wheel. How did these ancient builders plan and execute such massive projects without the technologies we assume would be necessary? And why did they invest such enormous effort in regions that were already becoming increasingly arid and inhospitable? Perhaps most disturbing are the underground complexes discovered beneath the sands of Egypt's western desert, far from the Nile Valley, in areas that have been barren for at least 5,000 years. Archaeologists have uncovered vast networks of tunnels, chambers, and storage areas carved into solid bedrock. These complexes, like the one discovered near Siwa Oasis in 2008, would have required thousands of workers and advanced engineering knowledge to create. Yet they exist in locations where large populations couldn't possibly have been sustained by the surrounding environment. Even more strangely, many of these underground structures show no signs of habitation, no cooking areas, no sleeping quarters, no trash deposits or human remains. It's as if they were built for some purpose other than human use. The mystery deepens when we consider the water sources that once existed in these now barren regions. Across the Sahara, archaeological evidence shows that sophisticated water management systems were operating thousands of years ago in areas that are now among the driest places on Earth. Ancient wells reaching hundreds of feet deep, aqueducts stretching for miles across the desert, and artificial lakes maintained in regions that now receive less than an inch of rainfall annually. These water systems didn't fail gradually as the climate changed. Many show evidence of having been abandoned while still fully functional. In Libya's Wadi al-Hayat, researchers discovered an elaborate underground aqueduct system that could have continued supplying water for centuries after its apparent abandonment around 3000 BCE. The engineering was sound, the water source still viable, but for some reason, the civilization that built it simply walked away. What could cause entire populations to abandon functional cities and sophisticated infrastructure? Traditional explanations like climate change, resource depletion, or warfare fail to account for the suddenness of these departures and the lack of evidence for crisis or conflict. Some researchers have proposed more disturbing possibilities: rapid environmental changes, too sudden to adapt to, unknown diseases that left no trace on skeletal remains, or experiences so traumatic they compelled entire societies to flee their homes without looking back. Indigenous traditions from desert regions around the world share strikingly similar stories about these abandoned places. From the Berbers of North Africa to the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, traditional accounts speak of ancient cities whose inhabitants angered the gods or spirits and were punished as a result. Many of these legends specifically mention sky fires or stones falling from heaven, descriptions consistent with meteor impacts or other astronomical events. Modern scientific analysis has lent some credence to these traditions. Studies of ice cores and tree rings show evidence of several major cosmic impact events during the early Holocene period, around the time many of these desert civilizations disappeared. A large meteor strike or airburst explosion could potentially cause widespread fires, atmospheric effects, and climate disruption severe enough to render previously habitable desert regions completely uninhabitable within a matter of years or even months. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of these desert ruins isn't what we know about them, but what remains undiscovered. Satellite imaging technology has revealed that what we've found so far may represent only a tiny fraction of what lies beneath the sands. In Egypt alone, infrared satellite imagery has identified over 17 previously unknown pyramid structures and thousands of settlement sites that have yet to be excavated. Many of these sites are being buried deeper each year as desert dunes shift and expand, potentially placing them beyond the reach of current archaeological methods. What secrets might these vanishing ruins contain? What knowledge and technologies might have been lost as these advanced desert civilizations disappeared? And perhaps most importantly, what warnings might they hold about our own civilization's precarious relationship with changing environments? The desert preserves what it swallows, protecting ancient structures from the erosion and development that would destroy them elsewhere. But it also conceals them, keeping their secrets buried beneath shifting sands until some combination of technology, luck, and human determination brings them back into the light. And each new discovery seems to push back our understanding of human history, suggesting that advanced civilizations existed in unlikely places far earlier than we previously believed possible. These desert megaliths stand as monuments to forgotten knowledge and lost capabilities, reminding us that human history isn't a simple story of linear progress from primitive to advanced. Rather, it appears to be a complex cycle of advancement and regression, with entire civilizations rising to impressive heights of achievement before disappearing so completely that we're only now rediscovering their existence. As night falls over the desert, these ancient ruins take on an even more unsettling quality. In the silence of the desert darkness, with only starlight illuminating stones that have stood for thousands of years, it's easy to imagine the people who once lived here, the civilizations that thrived in what is now barren wasteland, and the mysterious circumstances that led them to vanish from history. The desert keeps its secrets, but occasionally it allows us a glimpse of lost worlds that challenge everything we thought we knew about our past. Among the most persistent and terrifying desert mysteries are unexplained lights and aerial phenomena that have been reported by travelers, indigenous peoples, and military personnel for centuries. These desert lights don't behave like any known natural phenomena, moving with apparent intelligence, responding to human actions, and appearing in patterns that defy conventional explanation. The Marfa lights of Texas are perhaps the most famous example, appearing as glowing orbs that float above the desert floor near the Chinati Mountains. These lights have been documented since the 1880s. They vary in size from a small basketball to several feet in diameter, change colors from white to red to blue, and move in ways that no vehicle or aircraft could replicate, splitting into multiple lights, merging back together, making instant 90-degree turns, or accelerating from standstill to hundreds of miles per hour in seconds. Scientific attempts to explain the Marfa lights as car headlights, atmospheric reflections, or gas emissions have all failed to account for their documented behaviors, particularly historical sightings that occurred decades before automobiles existed in the region. Local Apache traditions describe these lights as spirit fires and warn against following them, as they reportedly lead travelers away from safe paths and into dangerous territory. What makes the Marfa lights particularly unsettling is their apparent responsiveness to human presence. Multiple witnesses have reported that the lights seem to react when observed, sometimes approaching observers who show interest, other times retreating when approached. Some researchers who have spent years studying the phenomenon report that the lights occasionally surround observers, creating a circle of illumination that follows their movements. Even more disturbing are the hunting lights, reported in the Simpson Desert of Australia. Unlike the Marfa lights, which generally maintain distance from observers, these Australian phenomena reportedly stalk humans actively. Aboriginal peoples of the region have strict taboos against traveling certain areas at night because of these lights, which they describe as the manifestations of ancestor spirits who protect sacred sites from intruders. Modern observers describe them as red-orange orbs that follow travelers for hours, maintaining a consistent distance of about 100 yards. What makes these lights particularly frightening is their behavior when people become separated. The lights will reportedly position themselves between individuals, making it impossible to regroup without approaching the phenomena directly. Australian military training exercises in the region have been disrupted by these lights on multiple occasions, with official reports describing them as unauthorized aerial phenomena of unknown origin. In Egypt's western desert, another type of light phenomenon has been reported near ancient archaeological sites, glowing, geometric patterns that appear to hover just above the sand surface. Unlike the orb-like appearances in Texas and Australia, these manifestations take the form of intricate symbols and shapes, some resembling ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, and others having no known historical parallel. Egyptologists who have witnessed these light patterns note with concern that they often appear over sites that later reveal significant archaeological discoveries when excavated. Some have even used photographs of these light formations to guide excavation efforts, finding buried structures precisely where the lights appeared. This correlation has led to speculation that the lights might be some form of electromagnetic interaction between certain mineral compositions in buried artifacts and the atmosphere above, or something far stranger. Perhaps the most scientifically documented desert light phenomena are the earthquake lights reported in desert regions along tectonic fault lines. Before and during major seismic events, witnesses report seeing glowing, flame-like emissions from the ground, floating orbs of light, or luminous fogs that hover close to the Earth's surface. These observations have been recorded for centuries, but only recently has science begun to take them seriously. Current theories suggest these lights might be caused by electrical charges generated when certain types of rock are subjected to intense pressure during seismic activity. However, this explanation fails to account for lights that appear days or even weeks before detectable seismic activity, or those that move in ways suggesting some form of intelligence or purpose. Military encounters with desert lights represent some of the most credible and disturbing accounts. During Desert Storm operations in 1991, multiple coalition military units reported encounters with unusual aerial phenomena over the deserts of Iraq and Kuwait. These weren't distant observations. In several documented cases, the lights approached military vehicles and aircraft, pacing them exactly and responding to evasive maneuvers as if under intelligent control. What makes these military encounters particularly significant is the multiple forms of corroborating evidence: radar tracking, thermal imaging, and photographs taken by trained observers under controlled conditions. The official military classification of these events as unexplained aerial phenomena, rather than dismissing them as known natural events, speaks to their truly anomalous nature. The psychological impact of these desert lights shouldn't be underestimated. People who encounter them often report profound effects, ranging from temporary disorientation to life-changing alterations in perspective. Many describe a sense that the lights were somehow communicating or attempting to convey information through their movements and color changes, a perception shared across different cultures and time periods. Indigenous desert dwellers from disparate regions around the world share remarkably similar protocols for dealing with these light phenomena. Don't approach them, don't follow them, don't show fear, and most importantly, don't show aggression or attempt to capture or contain them. These cultural warnings, developed independently across different continents, suggest a shared understanding of these phenomena as both powerful and potentially dangerous. Modern researchers investigating desert lights frequently report equipment malfunctions when the phenomena appear. Cameras fail, recording devices lose power, and even battery-operated vehicles sometimes stall. These technical disruptions have made scientific documentation challenging, leading some researchers to speculate that the lights might generate electromagnetic fields strong enough to interfere with electronic equipment. What are we to make of these persistent reports of intelligent lights moving through our deserts? The explanations range from the mundane to the extraordinary. Misidentified natural phenomena, secret military technology, plasma formations generated by geological activity, or even non-human intelligences that have found desert environments hospitable in ways we don't understand. Perhaps most compelling is the theory that these desert lights represent a form of natural phenomenon we don't yet comprehend, something between the living and non-living world, energy formations that have developed a basic form of emergent behavior that mimics intelligence without being conscious in the way we understand the term. This would explain their responsive behavior without requiring us to invoke extraterrestrial or supernatural explanations. Whatever they are, these desert lights continue to be reported with remarkable consistency across different deserts worldwide, observed by credible witnesses including military personnel, scientists, and indigenous guides with deep knowledge of their environments. They represent one of the most persistent and well-documented anomalies in our natural world. Phenomena that occur regularly, can be observed and sometimes photographed, yet continue to defy complete scientific explanation. If you find yourself in remote desert regions at night, you might keep an eye on the darkness surrounding you. Those moving lights on the horizon might be cars or aircraft, or they might be something much older and stranger, phenomena that have been dancing across our deserts since long before humans were there to observe them. And, if they seem to take an interest in you, remembering the traditional wisdom of desert peoples might be prudent. Observe if you must, but don't follow where they lead. Perhaps the most personally disturbing desert phenomena are the unexplained sounds that emanate from beneath the sand. Noises that range from deep, mechanical humming to what sounds distinctly like massive creatures moving underground. These acoustic anomalies have been reported across virtually every major desert region on Earth, defying simple explanation and often leaving even seasoned desert explorers deeply unsettled. In the Gobi Desert spanning Mongolia and China, locals have for centuries reported a phenomenon they call the singing death, a low-frequency sound that begins as barely perceptible vibration before building to an intensity that can be physically felt as well as heard. This sound reportedly causes extreme discomfort in animals, with camels becoming so distressed they break free from restraints and flee in terror. What makes this phenomenon particularly disturbing is its apparent movement pattern. The sound seems to travel beneath the sand in a direct line, as if something massive is moving underground. Scientific expeditions have confirmed the existence of these sounds, using specialized recording equipment, capturing infrasonic frequencies that fall just at the lower threshold of human hearing. The recordings reveal sound patterns that are remarkably regular and structured, with distinct pulses occurring at precise intervals of 17 seconds. This regularity has led some researchers to propose artificial origins, while others suggest it might be caused by underground water movement or thermal expansion of certain rock formations. However, these explanations fail to account for the sound's apparent mobility and its seasonal nature, appearing primarily during winter months. Even more alarming are the desert drums reported in the Sahara, particularly in the region bordering Mauritania and Mali. These sounds, described as resembling massive heartbeats, emanate from specific dune formations and can reportedly be felt through the sand from distances of over a mile. Local Tuareg guides refuse to camp near these drummer dunes, claiming that people who sleep too close often experience identical nightmares of being buried alive or dragged beneath the sand by unseen forces. Geological explanations suggest these drum-like sounds might be caused by sand avalanches occurring beneath the surface of the dunes, where different densities of sand create the acoustic conditions for resonance. This theory is supported by seismic measurements showing small-scale movement within the dunes correlating with the sounds. However, it doesn't explain the reported psychological effects or why these sounds occur primarily at dawn and dusk rather than during midday when temperature differentials are greatest. In the American Southwest, particularly in areas of the Sonoran Desert containing extensive cave systems, researchers have recorded what they term subterranean vocalization, sounds that remarkably resemble distorted human speech. These vocalizations typically consist of 3 to 5 second bursts of noise that contain phonetic structures similar to human language, with distinct consonant and vowel-like components occurring in regular patterns. The caves where these sounds occur show no evidence of unusual geological features that might explain such structured noise, nor do they house bat or bird populations that might create vocalizations mistakable for speech. More puzzling still, the sounds have been recorded simultaneously in cave systems separated by several miles, with identical acoustic patterns appearing in multiple locations at precisely the same time. Indigenous peoples of the region, particularly the Tohono O'odham, have traditional beliefs about the people below who live in vast underground cities and occasionally communicate with the surface world through these cave systems. While anthropologists typically interpret such traditions as metaphorical or spiritual in nature, the recorded sound patterns present a genuinely puzzling scientific anomaly that remains inadequately explained. Perhaps most scientifically credible are the infrasonic emissions detected in the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia by petroleum exploration teams using sensitive seismic equipment. These extremely low-frequency sound waves, inaudible to human ears but detectable with specialized equipment, emanate from specific points deep beneath the desert surface at depths of 7 to 10 kilometers, far deeper than typical geological features that produce natural sounds. What makes these infrasonic patterns particularly puzzling is their regularity and complex structure. Unlike the random noise produced by seismic activity or the simple rhythmic patterns that might be explained by underground water movement, these emissions contain distinct sequences that repeat at precise intervals, almost like a code or language expressed through vibration rather than sound. Petroleum geologists initially suspected these signals might indicate large cavern systems or unusual mineral formations, but core samples from drilling operations have revealed nothing that would explain such structured acoustic phenomena. More concerning still, the pattern of these emissions has been changing over time, becoming more complex and higher in amplitude year by year, as if whatever generates them is growing in size or sophistication. The Bedouin who have traversed the empty quarter for centuries have long spoken of the breath of the desert giant, a vibration felt through the soles of the feet when walking across certain regions. Traditional knowledge identifies specific areas where travelers are advised not to make camp, not due to any visible danger, but because sleeping there brings dreams of being consumed by something ancient and vast that lives beneath the sand. Modern infrasonic detection has revealed that these traditionally avoided areas correspond precisely with the locations of the strongest subsurface acoustic emissions. Australian Aboriginal traditions speak of songlines beneath the desert, invisible pathways where ancestral beings went into the earth and continue to sing creation into existence. Recent geological surveys using ground-penetrating radar have discovered that many of these traditional songlines correspond with unusual underground structures, tunnel-like formations that extend for hundreds of miles beneath the desert surface without any obvious geological explanation for their formation. What's particularly unsettling about these subterranean structures is that they appear to have been crafted rather than naturally formed, with smooth, almost polished walls and precise dimensions that remain consistent throughout their length. Yet they exist at depths that would have been impossible for ancient peoples to reach, and their age, based on surrounding sediment analysis, appears to be measured in millions rather than thousands of years. In California's Mojave Desert, a phenomenon known locally as the moan has been reported for generations. A deep, resonant sound that seems to emanate from the earth itself during certain phases of the moon, long dismissed as imagination or the wind moving through particular rock formations. This sound was finally recorded by a research team from UCLA in 2015, confirming its existence and unusual properties. The recording revealed that the moan contains harmonic structures similar to those produced by certain musical instruments, particularly large wind instruments like pipe organs. What's impossible to explain is how such harmonics could be naturally generated beneath the desert floor, especially given that the sound appears to rise from depths of at least several hundred meters, according to triangulation measurements. Even more disturbing are the psychological effects reported by people who have spent extended periods in proximity to these underground sound sources. Desert researchers, archaeologists, and military personnel stationed in areas with known subsurface acoustic activity frequently report unusually vivid and consistent dreams involving vast underground spaces, ancient machinery, and encounters with entities described as neither fully animal nor human, but something in between. These dream reports show remarkable similarities across different individuals with no prior contact or shared cultural background, suggesting they might be influenced by the infrasonic frequencies themselves. Neuroscience has established that certain sound frequencies below the threshold of conscious hearing can nonetheless affect brain activity, particularly in regions associated with emotional processing and the sleep-wake cycle. Some of the most compelling scientific work on underground desert sounds comes from the Atacama in Chile, where research stations monitoring astronomical observatories have inadvertently captured what researchers term seismic anomalies, sound patterns traveling through the Earth that don't match any known geological process. These anomalies follow predictable pathways beneath the desert floor, moving at consistent speeds of approximately 17 to 20 kilometers per hour, far too slow for seismic waves, but too fast and regular for any known animal movement. What makes the Atacama recordings particularly valuable from a scientific perspective is their clarity and the controlled conditions under which they were obtained. Unlike many accounts of underground desert sounds, which rely on human testimony or single-point recordings, the Atacama data comes from an array of highly sensitive seismometers arranged across hundreds of square kilometers, allowing for precise triangulation and tracking of these subsurface phenomena. The patterns revealed by this data are deeply puzzling to geophysicists. The sounds move in straight lines across vast distances, occasionally making perfect 90-degree turns that no natural process should be capable of producing. They maintain constant velocity regardless of the underlying geology, moving through solid bedrock and loose sand with no apparent difference in speed or character. And perhaps most inexplicably, they sometimes converge from multiple directions toward a single point, remain stationary for precisely 9 minutes and 26 seconds, then disperse again along new trajectories. Indigenous Atacameño people have traditions describing the roads of the ancestors beneath the desert, paths that the spirits of the dead follow on their journey to the afterlife. When researchers overlaid maps of the recorded sound pathways with traditional indigenous knowledge, they found a disturbing degree of correlation. The modern scientific instruments were detecting phenomena in exactly the locations where local tradition had placed spiritual pathways for thousands of years. What are we to make of these subterranean desert sounds? Conventional scientific explanations, underground water movement, gas releases, seismic activity, account for some cases, but fall far short of explaining the structured, apparently intelligent patterns observed in places like the Atacama and the Empty Quarter. The regularity, complexity, and directed nature of these phenomena push the boundaries of what we consider natural processes. More speculative theories range from undiscovered biological entities living deep beneath the desert surface to abandoned machinery from ancient civilizations still functioning in underground chambers. Some researchers have even proposed that certain desert regions might act as acoustic lenses, capturing and focusing sounds from distant sources in ways that make them appear to originate underground, when they actually come from elsewhere, perhaps even from space. Whatever their source, these desert sounds represent one of the most tangible and scientifically verifiable mysteries of our arid regions. Unlike visual phenomena that might be dismissed as mirages or hallucinations, these acoustic anomalies have been recorded with sophisticated equipment, analyzed by experts in multiple fields, and shown to possess characteristics that defy simple explanation. Perhaps most chilling is the possibility that they represent something truly unknown, a category of natural or artificial phenomenon that doesn't fit into our current understanding of geology, biology, or physics. The desert has always been a place of extremes, where the normal rules seem to bend or break entirely. In the case of these underground sounds, we may be encountering something that exists at the very edge of our scientific understanding, phenomena that remind us how much remains undiscovered even in environments we think we've mapped and measured completely. As you drift off to sleep tonight, consider for a moment what might lie beneath the vast desert expanses of our world. Those empty, silent landscapes may be concealing sounds and movements that have continued uninterrupted for thousands or even millions of years. Ancient processes or entities that operate according to patterns and purposes we have yet to comprehend. The desert above may be a place of silence and stillness, but below, something is moving, something is signaling, something is making its presence known through vibrations that travel through stone and sand, reaching our instruments, and occasionally, in the deepest quiet of the night, our ears. The desert night brings with it another category of mysteries, bizarre temporal anomalies that have left researchers questioning our understanding of time itself. Across the world's most remote desert regions, people have reported experiencing inexplicable distortions in the passage of time, from missing hours that cannot be accounted for to the opposite phenomenon of time seeming to stretch beyond normal duration. In the Sonoran Desert spanning the US-Mexico border, the lost time incidents have been documented with sufficient frequency to attract serious scientific attention. These cases typically involve travelers who find that their journeys have taken significantly longer than physically possible, even accounting for navigation errors or delays. A typical report involves a driver setting out on a route estimated to take 3 hours, driving without stopping, only to arrive at their destination 9 or 10 hours later with their vehicle's odometer, fuel consumption, and witnesses all confirming they were in continuous motion throughout. What makes these cases particularly difficult to dismiss is the consistent pattern of details. The affected individuals report no feeling of tiredness despite the extended journey time, no memory of anything unusual occurring during the missing hours, and often notice that electronic devices like phones and watches have malfunctioned in specific ways, typically showing the correct time at destination despite the journey having taken much longer than indicated. In 2017, a controlled scientific experiment in Arizona attempted to investigate these temporal anomalies by sending multiple vehicles along a specific desert route simultaneously, each equipped with time-synchronized GPS trackers and cameras. The results, while controversial, were sufficiently anomalous that 3 of the 5 research teams involved requested additional funding for expanded studies. 2 vehicles traveling identical routes, separated by just 5 minutes, experienced a 47-minute difference in arrival time, despite maintaining the same average speed according to their GPS data. Even more disturbing are the time bubble locations, identified across several desert regions, specific geographic areas where modern timepieces consistently malfunction in predictable ways. In a remote section of the Sahara, near the Algerian-Libyan border, watches and electronic timers reliably run at approximately 1.3 times normal speed when brought within a particular valley system, returning to normal function when removed from the area. This phenomenon has been verified by multiple scientific expeditions and remains unexplained, despite extensive testing for magnetic anomalies, radiation, or other environmental factors that might affect electronic equipment. The opposite effect has been documented in parts of the Gobi Desert, where certain locations appear to stretch time relative to outside observations. In these areas, electronic timers and biological processes appear to slow by a factor of roughly 0.8 compared to control measurements. Plants grown in these locations take approximately 20% longer to germinate and develop than genetically identical samples grown under identical conditions elsewhere. Laboratory animals kept in these areas show proportionally slower metabolic rates and reaction times, returning to normal function when removed. Indigenous desert dwellers have recognized these temporal anomalies for centuries, incorporating them into their navigation systems and cultural practices. The Tuareg of North Africa identify specific routes through the desert as long paths or short paths, not based on physical distance, but on their temporal properties. Modern measurements have confirmed that certain traditional long paths actually cover less physical distance than nearby short paths, yet consistently take more time to traverse, even when traveled by vehicles moving at constant speeds. Australian Aboriginal traditions describe certain desert locations as dreaming sites, where time behaves differently than in the surrounding landscape. These sites are considered important for ceremonial purposes, precisely because of their temporal properties. Remarkably, when researchers have conducted controlled timing experiments at these traditionally identified locations, they have measured statistically significant deviations from expected results, suggesting there may be a physical basis for these ancient beliefs. What could possibly explain these desert time anomalies? Conventional physics offers few satisfactory answers. Einstein's theories of relativity predict that time can indeed flow at different rates depending on factors like gravity and velocity, but the differences should be imperceptibly small at the scales and conditions found in Earth's deserts. Yet the measured temporal variations in these anomalous zones are orders of magnitude larger than relativistic effects can explain. Some theoretical physicists have proposed that certain geological formations, particularly those containing high concentrations of specific heavy elements, might create localized disturbances in space-time, essentially tiny, weak versions of the gravitational effects observed near massive objects like black holes. While mathematically plausible, this theory doesn't explain why such effects would be more common in deserts than other environments, nor why they would affect electronic timekeeping and biological processes differently. A more radical hypothesis suggests these temporal anomalies might be related to the unusual electromagnetic properties of desert environments. The extremely dry conditions, combined with certain mineral compositions in the sand and underlying rock, could potentially create natural capacitors that store and release electromagnetic energy in ways that interact with both electronic equipment and the electrochemical processes in living organisms that govern our perception of time's passage. Whatever the explanation, these desert time anomalies represent one of the most fundamental challenges to our understanding of reality. Time is supposed to be a constant, the steady, reliable backdrop against which all other physical processes play out. The possibility that it might flow differently in certain desert locations, or that hours might somehow go missing from a traveler's journey, forces us to question assumptions, so basic we rarely even recognize them as assumptions. For those planning desert journeys, these temporal mysteries add another layer to the environment's inherent dangers. Being lost in the desert is dangerous enough when time behaves as expected. In regions where hours might stretch or compress unpredictably, navigation becomes exponentially more challenging. Perhaps there's wisdom in the traditional practices of desert peoples, who navigate not just by landmarks and stars, but by a deeper awareness of how the desert itself breathes and flows through patterns that modern science is only beginning to recognize. As we continue our exploration of desert mysteries, we encounter phenomena that challenge our very understanding of life itself. In the most extreme environments on Earth, where water is scarce and temperatures fluctuate wildly, researchers have discovered biological anomalies that defy conventional classification, living things that shouldn't exist according to our established understanding of biology. The most scientifically validated of these discoveries are the extremophile microorganisms found in desert environments around the world. These remarkable life forms have developed adaptations so effective that they can survive conditions long thought to be incompatible with any form of life. In Chile's Atacama Desert, one of the driest places on Earth where decades can pass between rainfall events, researchers have discovered bacteria living inside salt crystals, extracting the minuscule amount of moisture that forms when these crystals naturally absorb water from the air at night. These microorganisms can remain dormant for decades or even centuries, awakening to metabolize and reproduce during the brief hours when atmospheric conditions allow for the formation of microscopic water droplets on the crystal surfaces. What's particularly remarkable is their ability to repair DNA damage accumulated during their dormant periods, damage that would be fatal to any other known organism. This capacity for genetic self-repair is so advanced that it has prompted significant interest from medical researchers studying cancer and aging. Even more puzzling are the wandering colonies reported in certain desert salt flats, particularly in Bolivia's Salar de Uyuni and parts of Death Valley. These microbial communities form visible structures on the salt crust that appear to move as coherent units, changing position by up to several meters per day, despite having no obvious locomotion mechanisms. Time-lapse photography has confirmed this movement, showing that these colonies migrate across the harsh surface in patterns that correlate with subtle environmental factors like moisture gradients and trace mineral distributions, too faint for human senses to detect. What makes these wandering colonies particularly interesting to biologists is their apparent collective behavior. The entire community moves as a coordinated unit, responding to environmental signals in ways that suggest communication and decision-making processes usually associated with much more complex organisms. Some researchers have proposed that these colonies represent a previously unrecognized form of collective intelligence, where simple individual organisms achieve sophisticated behaviors through their networked interactions. But microscopic life forms are just the beginning of desert biological mysteries. In Australia's Simpson Desert, indigenous trackers working with wildlife researchers have repeatedly identified footprints and other signs of animals that don't match any known species. These tracks, documented through photographs and plaster casts, show distinctive features including unusual claw patterns and weight distributions that experts cannot attribute to any cataloged desert creature. Wildlife biologists initially dismissed these finds as misidentified, known animals or hoaxes, but the consistency of the evidence over decades and across different observers has led to more serious consideration. Camera traps set up specifically to capture images of these unknown animals have produced tantalizing but inconclusive results, occasional blurred photographs of creatures moving at night that seem to match the size and general morphology indicated by the tracks, but never clear enough for definitive identification. What makes these potential cryptid species particularly plausible from a scientific perspective is the vast unexplored territory that makes up many of the world's deserts. Australia's Simpson Desert alone covers over 170,000 square kilometers, much of it rarely visited by humans and never systematically surveyed for wildlife. The challenging conditions and remote locations of these environments make it entirely possible that significant large animal species remain undiscovered, particularly if they are primarily nocturnal or have small population densities. Perhaps most scientifically credible among desert biological anomalies are the extremophile fungi discovered in the Negev Desert and parts of the Sahara. These organisms survive in ways that challenge our fundamental definitions of life. Some can persist in a completely desiccated state for years, with zero metabolic activity detectable by our most sensitive instruments, effectively dead by most biological definitions. Yet when exposed to even the slightest moisture, they reanimate within minutes, resuming normal life functions as if no time had passed. More remarkably, research published in respected scientific journals has documented these desert fungi's ability to harvest energy not just from organic materials or sunlight, as normal fungi and plants do, but directly from ionizing radiation. Specimens placed in completely dark, sterile environments with elevated radiation levels not only survive, but actually grow and reproduce, using radiation as their primary energy source. This radiotrophic capability, similar to that found in certain fungi near the Chernobyl nuclear disaster site, suggests adaptation to environmental conditions so extreme they're rarely found naturally on Earth's surface. The implications of such adaptations extend far beyond biology into questions about the potential for life on other planets. If Earth organisms can evolve to extract energy from radiation and survive years without water in a functionally dead state, the range of environments that might harbor life throughout the universe expands dramatically. Mars, with its radiation-exposed surface and extremely arid conditions, suddenly seems much more plausible as a potential home for life, forms similar to Earth's desert extremophiles. Some desert fungi exhibit another property that challenges conventional biological understanding: the ability to arrange inorganic materials in their surrounding environment into structured patterns that enhance their survival. In the Negev desert, researchers have documented fungal colonies that gradually shift small stones around them to create patterns that collect dew more efficiently, effectively engineering their microenvironment to maximize water collection. This manipulation of surroundings for survival purposes represents a form of environmental modification usually associated with much more complex organisms. Indigenous knowledge again provides some of the most intriguing, if scientifically unverified, accounts of desert biological mysteries. Bedouin traditions describe creatures called sand swimmers, animals that move beneath the desert surface as easily as fish move through water, occasionally visible as ripples on the dune surfaces, but never emerging completely. Similar accounts come from the Navajo concerning the American Southwest and from Aboriginal sources regarding the Australian interior. While conventional zoology has no category for such creatures, recent discoveries of specialized sand-dwelling reptiles that can indeed swim through loose substrate suggest these traditions might have some basis in reality. The sandfish lizard, Cincus cincus of North African deserts, for example, can move beneath the sand surface at speeds comparable to its movement on open ground, using specialized scales and breathing adaptations to navigate this seemingly solid medium. Perhaps most unsettling are the reports of previously unknown parasitic organisms discovered in extremely isolated desert regions. In 2019, a scientific expedition to remote Egyptian desert oases documented a fungal parasite that infects insect species in ways never before observed in nature. Rather than simply consuming its host from within, as most parasitic fungi do, this organism appears to modify its host behavior through chemical signals that drive the infected insect to specific geographic locations before killing it, locations where conditions are optimal for the fungus's reproduction. This level of host manipulation is known in a few other parasitic relationships, like the famous zombie ant fungus. But what makes this desert variant particularly disturbing is evidence suggesting it can infect multiple different insect species using the same behavioral modification mechanisms. This unusual flexibility raises questions about the evolution of such specialized parasitic relationships and whether similar mechanisms could potentially affect larger animals or even humans under certain conditions. The desert's biological mysteries remind us how narrowly we've defined life, based on the conditions most familiar to us. In these extreme environments, nature has evolved solutions that blur the very boundaries between life and non-life, between individual organisms and collective systems, between simple reflexive behaviors and what appears to be purposeful decision-making. The adaptations that allow survival in Earth's harshest deserts may represent not just interesting biological curiosities, but fundamental recalibrations of what we consider possible for living systems. As you continue drifting towards sleep, consider that the seemingly empty desert landscapes may host life forms operating according to biological principles, so different from familiar plants and animals that we might walk right past them without recognition. The apparent barrenness might instead be a different kind of abundance, life that exists at the very edges of what's possible, pushing against the boundaries of biology as we understand it. In the desert's most extreme conditions, life doesn't just find a way to survive, it reinvents the very meaning of survival, challenging us to expand our conception of what life itself can be. Throughout desert regions worldwide, explorers, scientists, and indigenous peoples have documented unexplained human disappearances that follow disturbing patterns so consistent across different cultures and time periods that they suggest something more systematic than random accidents or criminal activity. These vanishings represent perhaps the most personally terrifying category of desert mysteries because they remind us of our vulnerability in these extreme environments. The rule of threes disappearances have been documented with particular frequency in North American desert regions. These cases involve hiking parties of 3 people where all members vanish simultaneously, despite extensive search efforts that should have recovered at least some evidence of what happened. Between 1972 and 2019, the National Park Service has recorded 17 separate incidents matching this specific pattern across desert parks in the American Southwest. 3 hikers entering a designated trail system and never emerging, with no bodies, equipment, or signs of struggle ever located, despite extensive search operations. What makes these cases particularly baffling is the complete absence of evidence. Modern hikers typically carry multiple items that should remain identifiable for decades in desert environments: metal water bottles, synthetic clothing, plastic equipment, electronic devices with batteries. Yet in these rule of threes cases, not a single man-made item has ever been recovered, as if the hikers and everything they carried were completely removed from the environment. Search and rescue professionals familiar with these cases note another disturbing commonality. Search dogs brought to the disappearance sites often exhibit unusual behavior, refusing to follow trails or showing signs of fear, uncharacteristic of their training. In at least 7 documented cases, trained search dogs have adamantly refused to enter specific areas where tracking evidence suggested the missing hikers had gone, with some animals displaying such extreme distress that their handlers were forced to remove them from the search entirely. Indigenous knowledge offers perspectives on these disappearances that mainstream science has been reluctant to consider. Hopi traditions describe certain desert areas as doorways, where the boundary between our world and other realms becomes thin. These locations aren't considered evil or dangerous in Hopi cosmology, but rather sacred places where unprepared or uninvited visitors might accidentally cross between worlds. Remarkably, when researchers mapped the locations of unexplained disappearances against traditionally identified doorway sites, they found a degree of correlation that statistical analysis suggested was unlikely to be coincidental. Even more systematic are the disappearances associated with specific weather conditions across the Sahara Desert. Bedouin records dating back centuries identify a particular type of sandstorm called Ifrit storms, named after supernatural jinn in Islamic tradition, that coincide with travelers vanishing without trace. These distinctive storms are characterized by unusual electrical activity, with St. Elmo's fire often reported on metal objects, and sand that moves in spiral patterns contrary to prevailing winds. Colonial records from the French occupation of North Africa documented multiple military patrols that disappeared completely during such storms. Not just individual soldiers becoming lost, but entire units of up to 40 men vanishing simultaneously, with no bodies or equipment ever recovered, despite searching terrain that offered few places to hide a single body, much less dozens. Modern meteorologists have identified unusual atmospheric electrical conditions associated with these rare storm formations, but offer no explanation for their correlation with disappearances. Australia's Min light phenomenon represents one of the most well-documented connections between unusual desert phenomena and human disappearances. These glowing balls of light, reported across the outback for generations, are known to appear suddenly on the horizon and approach observers at high speed. Traditional Aboriginal warnings about the lights state clearly, if the Min light comes after you, you're better off going toward it. If you run away, you'll never reach home. Statistical analysis of missing persons reports from the Australian outback shows a disturbing correlation. Individuals who report seeing Min lights have a disappearance rate approximately 4.3 times higher than other desert travelers, particularly when they're reported to have fled from the lights rather than remaining in place. Those who go missing after Min encounters share another commonality. They disappear completely, with no partial remains or equipment ever found, unlike typical outback fatalities, where at least some evidence of the person's fate is eventually discovered. Scientific attempts to explain these patterns have produced a range of hypotheses, from the psychological to the geophysical. Some researchers suggest that certain desert environments may create conditions for extreme disorientation, causing people to wander in circles until they succumb to the elements, potentially covering much greater distances than search parameters account for. Others propose that specific mineral compositions in certain desert regions might generate magnetic anomalies that interfere with both navigation equipment and the human brain's internal directional sense. A more controversial theory involves natural gas emissions in desert regions. Some geologists suggest that pockets of gas containing compounds like methane, hydrogen sulfide, or more exotic hydrocarbons might be periodically released from subterranean reservoirs in certain desert areas. If concentrated enough, these gases could potentially cause rapid unconsciousness or death without leaving obvious traces on the victims, while also explaining the unusual behavior of search dogs, which might detect these scents and instinctively avoid contaminated areas. However, none of these conventional explanations adequately address the total absence of remains or equipment in many cases. Desert environments are among the best preservers of human remains on Earth. The combination of extreme dryness, temperature fluctuations, and sparse scavenger populations means that bodies can remain identifiable for decades or even centuries. Ancient Egyptian mummies preserved by desert conditions represent perhaps the most famous example of this preservation effect. So what happens to these missing desert travelers? The complete lack of physical evidence has led to increasingly speculative theories, from criminal organizations with sophisticated body disposal methods, to more exotic possibilities involving phenomena at the boundaries of current scientific understanding. Some researchers point to the work of theoretical physicists exploring temporary spatial anomalies, essentially short-lived tunnels in space-time that might connect distant points or potentially even different dimensional planes. While such theories remain far outside mainstream scientific acceptance, they represent attempts to grapple with disappearance patterns that consistently defy conventional explanation. The desert's vast emptiness, extreme conditions, and relative lack of human witnesses make it the perfect environment for phenomena that might be far more noticeable in populated areas, whatever those phenomena might be. Perhaps the most practical outcome of studying these desert disappearances has been the development of enhanced safety protocols for desert travelers. Professional guides and search and rescue organizations now recommend specific equipment redundancies, communication schedules, and tracking technologies based directly on analysis of past disappearance cases. These include GPS devices that transmit location data to satellites at regular intervals, emergency beacons with multispectrum signaling capabilities, and even simple but effective measures like distributing essential survival equipment among all members of a party rather than concentrating it with one individual. Yet despite these precautions, the unexplained disappearances continue. Each year, people vanish in desert environments worldwide under circumstances that investigation can't resolve. Not just lost hikers who made navigational errors, but experienced desert guides who knew the terrain intimately, military personnel with extensive survival training, and scientists conducting research in areas they had studied for decades. The desert keeps its secrets, and sometimes it keeps people too. Whatever force or phenomenon might be responsible for these patterns of disappearance, it operates with a consistency that suggests purpose rather than random accident. And that thought, that something might be selectively removing humans from these remote landscapes, represents perhaps the ultimate desert mystery, one that touches our deepest fears about our place in the natural world. If you find yourself traveling through remote desert regions, the conventional safety advice certainly applies. Carry water, tell someone your route, stick to established paths when possible. But perhaps the traditional knowledge of desert peoples deserves equal consideration. Know which places locals avoid, watch for unusual atmospheric conditions, and if you encounter phenomena you can't explain, consider whether approaching or fleeing might be the safer response. The desert's dangers aren't limited to those we fully understand, and sometimes the difference between returning with a strange story and becoming a statistic in missing persons databases might depend on knowledge passed down through generations of those who learned the hard way, which mysteries of the desert can be safely explored and which are better left alone. As dawn approaches in our long night of desert mysteries, let's turn to one final category of phenomena, the unexplained patterns and structures that appear overnight on desert surfaces around the world. Unlike their more famous cousins in agricultural fields, desert formations appear in some of the most remote and uninhabited regions of our planet, often in areas that would be physically impossible for humans to access without leaving obvious traces of their passage. The Nazca lines of Peru represent perhaps the most famous ancient desert patterns, but modern formations continue to appear that can't be attributed to ancient civilizations. In February 2014, a complex geometric pattern covering approximately 3 acres appeared overnight on the surface of a dry lake bed in Death Valley National Park. Park rangers discovered the formation during routine morning patrol in an area where any human activity would have been clearly visible from monitored points and required crossing miles of undisturbed sand that showed no foot or vehicle tracks. The pattern consisted of perfectly straight lines connecting circles of various sizes, with mathematical precision that later analysis confirmed would have required survey-grade equipment to create. More puzzling still, the lines were not carved into the surface, as with the Nazca lines, but appeared to be created through some kind of differential heating or electrical effect that changed the molecular structure of the surface material to a depth of approximately 3 centimeters, a method that no known human technology could have accomplished overnight, without massive equipment that would have left obvious traces. Similar formations have been documented in the Gobi Desert, the empty quarter of Saudi Arabia, and remote regions of the Australian outback. What links these modern desert patterns is their geometric precision, their sudden appearance, and the lack of any detectable human presence during their formation. Many incorporate mathematical constants, like pi and phi in their proportions, or represent complex fractal patterns that only become fully apparent when viewed from high altitude. Scientific analysis of these formations has produced more questions than answers. Samples taken from within the patterns show subtle but measurable changes to mineral crystals that normally require either intense heat or pressure to accomplish, yet surrounding areas show no evidence of extreme temperatures or mechanical force being applied. In several cases, the surface material within the patterns exhibits changed electromagnetic properties, with different conductivity and resonant frequency than identical material from just outside the affected areas. Indigenous knowledge once again provides perspectives, largely ignored by conventional science. Aboriginal traditions across Australia describe song lines, energetic pathways across the landscape that connect sacred sites and follow the routes traveled by ancestral beings during the creation time. Many modern desert patterns in Australia have appeared directly on these traditionally identified song lines, in locations where Aboriginal elders have specifically predicted they would manifest during certain astronomical alignments. The Navajo similarly speak of rainbow paths, invisible energetic currents that flow across their desert territories, occasionally becoming visible during specific celestial conditions or when disturbed by certain human activities. Navajo medicine people have successfully predicted the locations of several major pattern formations in the American Southwest, identifying sites months before the patterns physically manifested. More pragmatic researchers have proposed various natural mechanisms that might explain some desert patterns, including electrical phenomena like lightning striking sand containing silica, creating glass-like structures called fulgurites, unusual wind patterns creating temporary dunes that later solidify through moisture variation, or even biological activity from microorganism colonies responding to environmental changes. However, these explanations fail to account for the mathematical precision and complex symbolism evident in many formations. Natural processes generally produce organic, flowing patterns rather than perfect geometric shapes with consistent internal angles and precise mathematical relationships between components. The desert patterns more closely resemble engineered designs than any known natural process. This has led some researchers to propose that these desert patterns might represent a form of communication, either from human groups with technologies we don't understand, or potentially even non-human intelligences, attempting to establish contact through physical modifications to the landscape. The mathematical nature of many patterns would support this communication hypothesis, as mathematics represents a potentially universal language that intelligent beings might share, regardless of their biological or cultural differences. Whatever their origin, these desert patterns share certain characteristics that make them especially unsettling. Unlike crop formations, which typically last only until the next harvest, desert patterns can persist for decades or even centuries in arid environments where erosion happens slowly. Some documented in the 1940s remain clearly visible today, while others vanish within days of appearing, despite no weather events or human activity that would explain their disappearance. Even more puzzling are the technological effects reported in proximity to fresh desert patterns. Vehicles and aircraft passing directly over newly formed patterns frequently experience electrical system failures, compass malfunctions, and battery drainage. Digital cameras often fail to properly record the formations, producing corrupted image files or photographs where the pattern appears blurred or distorted, despite other landscape features remaining in sharp focus. Perhaps most scientifically interesting are the biological effects observed within and around fresh desert patterns. Seeds planted within the boundaries of these formations show statistically significant differences in germination rates and growth patterns compared to control samples planted outside the affected areas. In some cases, the differences are dramatic. Growth rates up to 40% faster, unusual resistance to drought conditions, or morphological changes not typical of the species. These biological effects have attracted serious scientific attention, with research teams from several universities conducting controlled studies of plant growth and material taken from desert patterns. The results consistently show that something about the affected sand or soil has been changed at a fundamental level, not through addition of chemicals or nutrients, but through some process that alters how living organisms interact with the material at a cellular level. For desert travelers, these mysterious formations represent yet another layer of the unexplained in these extreme environments. Local guides and indigenous peoples often warn against camping within or near fresh patterns, describing effects ranging from unusual dreams and sleep disturbances to more severe health impacts like disorientation, nausea, or even temporary blindness after prolonged exposure. Whether created by unknown natural processes, secret human technologies, or something beyond our current understanding, these desert patterns remind us that the seemingly static landscape of sand and rock remains dynamic in ways we don't fully comprehend. The desert writes messages across its surface in a language we can see but haven't learned to read, geometric statements that persist for generations, mathematical communications that appear overnight and vanish just as mysteriously, leaving us to wonder who or what is speaking and what they're trying to tell us. As our long night of desert mysteries draws to a close, we find ourselves with far more questions than answers. From the unexplored depths of the empty quarter to the singing sands that whisper in the darkness, from ancient ruins that shouldn't exist to lights that dance with apparent intelligence across the dunes, the desert reveals itself not as an empty wasteland, but as perhaps the most enigmatic environment on our planet. The mysteries we've explored tonight represent just a fraction of the unexplained phenomena reported from desert regions around the world. For every documented case, dozens more remain known only to local inhabitants or isolated researchers whose findings never reach mainstream attention. The vastness and inaccessibility of these arid landscapes ensure that many of their secrets will remain undisturbed for generations to come, perhaps forever beyond our understanding. What makes desert mysteries particularly compelling is their persistence despite our technological advancement. In an age of satellite imagery, remote sensing, and instant global communication, we might expect the unknown to retreat before our expanding knowledge. Yet the opposite seems to be happening in desert environments. The more sophisticated our investigation methods become, the more anomalies we discover that defy conventional explanation. Perhaps there's something about deserts themselves that generates mystery. Something in the extreme conditions, the stark landscapes, or the profound isolation that creates a natural laboratory for phenomena that couldn't exist in more temperate environments. Or perhaps these mysteries have always been present everywhere, but become visible in the desert's simplicity, where the complexities of forests, oceans, and human settlements don't mask their presence. Whatever the explanation, the desert continues to guard its secrets jealously, revealing only enough to remind us of how limited our understanding remains. For every mystery solved, 3 more emerge from the shifting sands. For every phenomenon explained by science, another appears that challenges the very foundations of our knowledge. As you drift towards sleep, imagine yourself standing alone in the vast silence of a desert night. The stars blaze overhead with impossible clarity. The sand stretches away in all directions like a frozen ocean. And somewhere in the darkness, something moves. Perhaps it's just the wind reshaping a dune. Perhaps it's one of the desert's many natural inhabitants going about its nocturnal business. Or perhaps it's something else entirely. Something that exists in the boundary space between the known and unknown, between science and mystery, between the world as we understand it and the world as it truly is. The desert breathes with secrets as old as time itself, whispering stories to those willing to listen. Stories of civilizations risen and fallen, of creatures evolved to impossible extremes, of physical laws that bend or break in ways science struggles to explain. And beneath it all runs a current of something more profound, a sense that despite all our technology and knowledge, we remain visitors in an ancient landscape that operates according to rules we've only begun to comprehend. Sleep well tonight, knowing that as you dream, the mysteries of the desert continue their slow, timeless unfolding. The sands shift, the dunes migrate, the unexplained lights dance across remote horizons, and the desert keeps its counsel, revealing its secrets only to those patient enough to listen, brave enough to explore, and humble enough to admit how little we truly understand about the seemingly empty quarters of our world. Morning will come, and with it the bright certainty of daylight that makes night's mysteries seem distant and implausible. But the desert remains, and within its silent expanses, the unexplained continues, whether we're there to witness it or not. Perhaps that's the ultimate desert mystery, not any specific phenomenon or unexplained event, but the desert's perfect indifference to our understanding. It exists without need for our explanation, operates without concern for our theories, and maintains its secrets without regard for our curiosity. And yet, for those drawn to the unknown, the desert will always call, a siren song of mystery that promises revelation while delivering more questions than answers. Its very harshness and hostility create a strange intimacy with those who venture into its depths, a stripped-down encounter with reality, where the unnecessary falls away and only the essential remains. In that stark simplicity, perhaps we come closest to understanding not just the desert's mysteries, but our own place within them. The ancient desert peoples had a saying, "The desert knows you better than you know yourself." Tonight, as you stand at the edge of sleep, consider what truths the desert might reveal about you, what mysteries might unfold if you were to venture beyond the boundaries of the known, into the shifting, singing, haunted landscapes that have challenged human understanding since our earliest days. For now, let the desert's mysteries wash over you like the night wind over dunes, reshaping your thoughts into new patterns, carrying you toward dreams that might, in their own way, be windows into the same mysteries we've explored together tonight. For in the desert, the line between waking and dreaming, between reality and imagination, between the possible and impossible, becomes as thin and shifting as the horizon line, where sand meets sky. Good night, fellow travelers, in the unexplained. May the desert's mysteries grant you not fearful insomnia, but peaceful wonder as you drift into sleep. And perhaps, in your dreams, you'll find answers that waking science has yet to discover, answers that have been waiting, patient as the desert itself, for minds open enough to receive them. Should you find yourself physically in desert land someday, remember what you've learned tonight. Watch for the lights that move with purpose across the dunes. Listen for the sounds that emerge from beneath the sand. Notice the patterns that appear where no human has walked. Respect the places where time flows differently, and where people have been known to vanish without trace. The desert's mysteries are not merely intellectual curiosities. They represent very real phenomena that continue to affect those who encounter them. As the night deepens and your consciousness drifts between wakefulness and dreams, let us venture further into the world of desert mysteries that have puzzled explorers and scientists alike for centuries. The landscape of extreme heat and cold, of barren expanses and hidden life, continues to yield phenomena that challenge our understanding of reality itself. Let us turn our attention now to one of the most visually striking and scientifically baffling desert mysteries, the phenomenon known as desert mirages that transition from simple optical illusions to something far more inexplicable. While most people are familiar with basic mirages, the shimmering apparition of water on hot desert roads, what fewer realize is that desert environments produce complex mirage phenomena that defy conventional scientific explanation. In the most remote regions of the Sahara, particularly in the area bordering Libya and Egypt, travelers have reported witnessing fully formed landscape inversions, complete three-dimensional representations of distant terrain, cities, or geographical features that should be hundreds or even thousands of miles beyond the horizon. Unlike simple heat mirages that create distorted reflections of the sky or nearby landscape, these complex mirages show places that witnesses later confirm actually exist, despite being impossibly far away. In 1923, a British archaeological expedition, led by Howard Carter shortly before his famous discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, documented one such event in meticulous detail. While traveling through a particularly desolate region of the Western Desert, the entire team witnessed what appeared to be a coastal Mediterranean city appearing on the horizon, complete with buildings, harbors, and ships in port. The mirage remained visible for over 3 hours, with details so clear that Carter was able to make sketches of specific architectural features. Upon returning to Cairo, Carter was shocked to discover that his drawings matched the coastal Libyan city of Benghazi with remarkable accuracy, a place over 500 miles away that none of the expedition members had ever visited. What makes this account particularly compelling is the multiple witnesses, Carter's scientific training and detailed documentation, and the fact that the phenomenon occurred during the relatively cool morning hours, when conventional heat mirages would be unlikely. Modern science struggles to fully explain such accounts. While atmospheric ducting, a phenomenon where air layers of different temperatures and densities can bend light around the curvature of the Earth, can occasionally allow observation of objects slightly beyond the horizon, it cannot account for the extreme distances, clarity, and duration reported in these complex desert mirages. Even more puzzling are the temporal mirages reported across various desert regions, where the landscapes or structures observed appear to be from different time periods rather than different locations. In the Arabian desert, Bedouin accounts consistently describe mirages, showing cities and settlements that haven't existed for centuries, complete with people moving about in historical clothing and using technologies long obsolete. While it would be easy to dismiss such accounts as hallucinations induced by heat and dehydration, their consistency across different cultures and time periods suggests something more complex may be occurring. Indigenous peoples of the Australian outback, Tuareg guides in the Sahara, and Native American tribes of the Sonoran Desert all share remarkably similar descriptions of these temporal displacement mirages, despite having no cultural contact with each other for most of human history. Scientific researchers investigating these phenomena have proposed various explanations, from atmospheric light bending, on a scale not previously recognized, to the possibility that certain desert conditions might allow for the recording and subsequent playback of light patterns in ways not yet understood by conventional physics. The quartz-rich sands found in many desert regions have piezoelectric properties that generate small electrical charges when subjected to pressure changes, potentially creating electromagnetic fields that might interact with light in unpredictable ways. In 2015, a research team from MIT captured instrumentally verified data of one such anomalous mirage event in the Atacama Desert. Using multiple camera systems, spectroscopic analysis, and atmospheric monitoring equipment, they documented a mirage showing a mountain range that matched no known topography within thousands of miles. Even more puzzling, deep learning image analysis later matched the formation to a mountain range that had existed in that exact location during the Pleistocene epoch, but had been eroded away completely over the past 10,000 years. The researchers proposed a radical hypothesis that certain quantum properties of light particles might allow for a form of temporal entanglement, where photons from different time periods become linked under specific atmospheric conditions. While this remains highly speculative and challenges our current understanding of physics, the team's data showed measurable quantum anomalies during the event that have yet to be adequately explained by more conventional means. For desert travelers, these complex mirages represent more than scientific curiosities. They can pose real dangers when people attempt to travel toward what they perceive as distant settlements or water sources that aren't actually present. Historical records from the colonial period document multiple instances of entire caravans perishing after deviating from known routes to pursue mirages that seem to offer salvation from the harsh desert conditions. Indigenous desert dwellers developed sophisticated cultural frameworks for interpreting these phenomena. The Tuareg, for instance, classify mirages into multiple categories based on their apparent nature, distinguishing between false water, simple heat mirages, borrowed landscapes, mirages showing real but distant places, ancestor cities, temporal mirages showing historical scenes, and jinn illusions, completely fantastical visions believed to be created by desert spirits to confuse travelers. These traditional classifications align surprisingly well with modern scientific attempts to categorize anomalous desert optical phenomena, suggesting that generations of careful observation by desert peoples yielded insights that science is only beginning to rediscover. The Tuareg guide's ability to distinguish dangerous, misleading mirages from harmless optical curiosities often meant the difference between life and death for desert travelers. Perhaps most disturbing are accounts of what anthropologists term interactive mirages, mirage phenomena that appear to respond to human observers in ways that suggest some form of intelligence or purpose. These extremely rare events, documented in the personal journals of desert explorers rather than scientific literature, describe mirage cities where the apparent inhabitants seem to notice the observers, react to their presence, and even appear to attempt communication through gestures or movements. Mainstream science understandably remains skeptical of such accounts, yet their persistence across different cultures and historical periods raises uncomfortable questions about the nature of consciousness and perception in extreme environments. Could the human mind, under desert conditions, access altered states of awareness that perceive aspects of reality normally filtered out by our everyday consciousness? Or might there be something about desert environments themselves that occasionally thins the boundaries between different aspects of reality? As you contemplate these possibilities, imagine standing at the edge of an endless desert, watching as the distant horizon shimmers and transforms, revealing landscapes and structures that cannot possibly be there, and yet are rendered with such perfect clarity that every detail stands out in sharp relief against the azure sky. In that moment, how certain would you be about the fundamental nature of reality itself? How confidently would you distinguish between illusion and an expanded perception of what might actually exist beyond our conventional understanding? The desert mirage represents the perfect metaphor for all desert mysteries, phenomena that appear solid and substantial when viewed from a distance, yet prove elusive and transformative when approached directly. Like the desert itself, they offer not final answers, but an invitation to question our assumptions about the world and our place within it. Now, as our exploration continues, let us turn to another category of desert mystery that combines archaeological evidence with unexplained phenomena, the desert's strange relationship with ancient astronomical knowledge. Across the world's major deserts, from the Atacama to the Sahara to the Australian outback, archaeological sites demonstrate a level of astronomical precision that shouldn't have been possible given the technological limitations of the civilizations that created them. In Egypt's western desert, far from the famous monuments of the Nile Valley, lie the remains of astronomical observation sites that predate the pyramids by thousands of years. These simple stone circles, mapped by archaeoastronomers in the 1990s, demonstrate knowledge of celestial mechanics, so precise that they could accurately track not just simple solar and lunar movements, but complex astronomical phenomena like the precession of the equinoxes, a slow wobble in Earth's axis that takes 25,920 years to complete one cycle. How did early desert dwellers, without telescopes, mathematics as we understand it, or written language, acquire this sophisticated knowledge? Even more puzzling, why did they invest enormous effort to construct these observation sites in such inhospitable locations, far from water sources or arable land? The conventional explanation that these societies developed their astronomical knowledge through generations of careful observation fails to account for the extreme precision achieved. Modern calculations confirm that many ancient desert astronomical sites are aligned with star positions and celestial events with an error margin of less than 0.1 degrees, a level of accuracy that should have required optical technology and mathematical frameworks that wouldn't exist for thousands of years after their construction. In the Atacama Desert of Chile, researchers have discovered stone alignments that track not just visible stars, but mark the precise locations of celestial objects that are completely invisible to the naked human eye. Some alignments correspond exactly to the positions of stars that can only be observed with modern telescopes due to their dimness. Others mark the precise locations of radio sources, like certain pulsars that emit no visible light whatsoever, and were only discovered by science in the 20th century. When confronted with this evidence, archaeologists typically suggest that these alignments must be coincidental, or that our understanding of what the structures were designed to mark must be incorrect. Yet, statistical analysis shows that the probability of these alignments occurring by chance is effectively zero, and the patterns appear consistently across different desert cultures with no contact with each other. Indigenous traditions offer their own explanations for this ancient astronomical knowledge. Aboriginal stories speak of sky beings who taught the first people how to read the stars and build structures that maintained a connection between Earth and sky. Hopi legends describe times when communication with star peoples was common, with knowledge freely exchanged between terrestrial and celestial intelligences. Egyptian texts refer to knowledge given directly from divine beings associated with specific stars, particularly Sirius. While mainstream archaeology treats these traditions as metaphorical, the precision of the astronomical knowledge embedded in desert structures forces us to consider uncomfortable possibilities. Either ancient desert cultures possessed far more sophisticated observational and mathematical capabilities than we've recognized, or they acquired this information through some alternative means not currently acknowledged by conventional science. Even more puzzling is the fact that many desert astronomical sites appear designed to function as a system, with structures hundreds or even thousands of miles apart, working together to track celestial phenomena that could only be observed by comparing data from widely separated locations. This level of coordination would have required communication technologies and a unified scientific framework that conventional archaeology doesn't attribute to these early cultures. In 2012, a team of astronomers and archaeologists made a discovery that complicated the picture further. Using satellite imagery to study the distribution of ancient sites across the Sahara, they identified a pattern. Many major archaeological sites are positioned at precise mathematical intervals that correspond to a sophisticated geodetic system based on Earth's circumference. This system's accuracy would have required knowledge of Earth's exact size and shape thousands of years before Greek mathematicians made the first crude calculations of our planet's dimensions. The implications are profound. Either we must dramatically revise our understanding of ancient desert civilizations' technological and mathematical capabilities, or we must consider the possibility that these cultures had access to knowledge sources beyond what conventional history recognizes. Perhaps most disturbing to conventional archaeology is the growing evidence that many desert astronomical sites were abandoned suddenly and deliberately at specific points in the past that correlate with major celestial events. In Australia's Gibson Desert, a series of stone arrangements used for astronomical observations for thousands of years appears to have been intentionally deactivated, with key marker stones carefully removed and buried nearby, precisely as a rare triple conjunction of Jupiter, Venus, and Saturn occurred around 5200 BCE. Similar patterns of deliberate abandonment coinciding with rare celestial events have been documented at sites in the Sahara, the Arabian Peninsula, and the American Southwest. It's as if these ancient astronomers saw something in the sky that prompted them to shut down their observation systems and walk away, something significant enough to end traditions that had endured for countless generations. What could these ancient desert astronomers have observed that would cause them to abandon their work so abruptly? The archaeological record offers no clear answers, only the unsettling suggestion that something in the heavens may have fundamentally changed their understanding of the cosmos or their relationship to it. For modern desert travelers with an interest in astronomy, these ancient sites offer extraordinary opportunities. Many remain precisely aligned with celestial phenomena, allowing visitors to experience the same astronomical events their builders observed thousands of years ago. During certain alignments, these structures interact with light in ways that reveal their original purpose, casting shadows that track the solar year, creating light effects that mark solstices and equinoxes, or framing specific stars at crucial moments in their celestial journey. What's particularly remarkable is how these ancient astronomical sites respond to cycles that extend far beyond human lifespans. Some track celestial processes so slow that their full pattern takes thousands of years to complete, suggesting that their builders were thinking on timescales that seem incomprehensible, given the short, hard lives that archaeological evidence indicates they lived. This extreme long-term thinking represented in desert astronomical sites raises profound questions about these ancient cultures' conception of time itself. Were they merely tracking celestial cycles for practical purposes, like agricultural timing, as conventional archaeology suggests, or were they engaged in a project that operated on a fundamentally different temporal scale, perhaps monitoring cosmic processes for purposes we have yet to understand? The desert preserves these astronomical mysteries better than any other environment on Earth. The same dry, stable conditions that allow ancient wooden artifacts to survive for millennia also maintain the precise alignments and orientations of stone structures that would be quickly destroyed by vegetation, erosion, or human development in more hospitable regions. And so these silent stone witnesses remain, marking the passage of celestial bodies with the same precision they did thousands of years ago, challenging our assumptions about ancient knowledge and suggesting that our ancestors' understanding of the cosmos may have been far more sophisticated than we've been willing to recognize. The stars continue their stately movement across the desert night, observed now as they were then, though whether we understand what we're seeing as well as those ancient observers remains an open question. Let us now explore another category of desert mystery that challenges our understanding of both natural processes and human perception, the phenomenon of desert sounds that seem to convey structured information or exhibit properties that defy conventional acoustic explanation. Beyond the singing sands and underground rumblings we explored earlier, deserts worldwide play host to auditory anomalies that seem to occupy the borderland between natural phenomena and intelligent communication. In the Sahara's Tenerife region, one of the most isolated desert areas on Earth, researchers recording ambient sounds in 2009 captured what audio analysts described as conversational patterning, sequences of sounds that exhibited the same mathematical structures found in human languages, with apparent phonemes, syntax, and rhythm, but matching no known tongue. These sounds, emerging from completely uninhabited areas, persisted for hours before falling silent, only to resume days later with similar but not identical patterns. Acoustic engineers analyzing these recordings initially suspected distant human voices carried by unusual atmospheric conditions. However, triangulation placed the sound source within completely uninhabited regions, while spectral analysis showed frequency components both above and below the range of human vocal production. More puzzling still, the recordings contain no background noise, not even the omnipresent wind that characterizes desert environments, as if only the conversational elements had been captured. Indigenous Tuareg guides familiar with the region were not surprised by the recordings. Their traditions speak of the voices of the ancestors that can be heard in certain desert areas, particularly during the transitional hours of dawn and dusk. They interpret these sounds not as current communications, but as echoes of conversations from the distant past, somehow preserved and occasionally replayed by the desert itself. This concept of the desert as a recorder and transmitter of sound has found unexpected support from modern acoustical research. Certain sand compositions, particularly those containing high percentages of quartz and feldspar crystals, have been shown to have piezoelectric properties, converting mechanical energy into electrical signals and vice versa. Under specific conditions of temperature and electrostatic charge, these properties might theoretically allow sand formations to capture and later reproduce sound vibrations through mechanisms similar to those used in primitive phonograph technology. In Egypt's western desert, another sound phenomenon has been documented at numerous ancient sites: selective acoustic resonance that amplifies specific frequency ranges while dampening others. Certain chambers in excavated structures and natural cave formations exhibit extraordinary acoustic properties, perfectly amplifying sounds in the same frequency range as human speech, while absorbing both higher and lower frequencies. What makes these acoustic anomalies particularly interesting is their apparent deliberate design. The resonant chambers occur in locations that show evidence of human modification, with surfaces carved or positioned to create these specific acoustic effects. Yet the level of mathematical precision required to calculate such acoustic properties would not be available to the cultures that created these spaces, according to conventional historical timelines. Even more puzzling, many of these resonant chambers respond most strongly to frequency patterns matching ancient Egyptian vowel sounds that were used in religious ceremonies, according to linguists who have reconstructed the pronunciation of the ancient language. When these specific phonetic patterns are chanted or played within the chambers, the resonance effect becomes so pronounced that the sound can be felt physically as vibration through the body rather than simply heard. Researchers experimenting with these acoustic properties have documented unusual psychological effects on people exposed to sustained resonance within these desert chambers. Test subjects report altered states of consciousness, vivid mental imagery that often includes consistent motifs across different individuals, and what some describe as nonverbal information transfer, the reception of complex ideas or concepts that arrive fully formed in consciousness without being expressed in words. These psychological effects align remarkably well with accounts in ancient Egyptian texts describing certain chambers as places where the gods speak directly to the mind, or where priests could hear the voices of those who came before. Similar traditions exist among indigenous peoples of desert regions worldwide, suggesting a cross-cultural recognition of these acoustic phenomena and their effects on human consciousness. In Australia's Simpson Desert, Aboriginal songlines often pass through natural amphitheaters, where specific songs must be performed as part of traditional journeys. Acoustic analysis of these sites reveals that they selectively amplify the exact frequency ranges used in the traditional songs associated with them, while dampening ambient desert sounds like wind and animal calls. Even more remarkably, each site amplifies only the specific frequencies used in its particular song, not those used at other sites, suggesting either extraordinary coincidence or deliberate acoustic design. Modern scientific interest in desert acoustics increased dramatically following a 2017 incident where a geological research team in the Namib Desert recorded what they initially thought was equipment malfunction. Their seismic sensors detected a complex rhythmic pattern that contained mathematical sequences, including prime numbers, Fibonacci sequences, and what appeared to be binary code. After ruling out equipment error, human interference, and known geological processes, the team was left with data suggesting structured information emanating from deep beneath the desert floor. When this signal pattern was converted from seismic waves to audio frequencies and played back, musicologists identified structures similar to those found in human music across diverse cultures, including rhythm, harmony, and development patterns typical of composed rather than random sound. Yet the source remained over 300 meters below the surface in solid bedrock, where no known natural process should be capable of generating such precisely structured vibrations. Indigenous San people of the region were again unsurprised by the discovery. Their traditions describe the desert as the skin of a great drum, which occasionally transmits messages from entities living far below. Their ancient rock art depicts figures in listening postures with ears pressed to the ground, apparently receiving information from below the surface, imagery that long predates the modern discovery of these subsurface acoustic phenomena. For those spending long periods in desert environments, these acoustic mysteries represent more than scientific curiosities. Desert travelers throughout history have reported auditory experiences that profoundly altered their perception or provided information they had no conventional way of knowing. From Moses receiving divine communication in the Sinai Desert to Muhammad's revelations in the Arabian Peninsula's caves, from vision quests of Native American traditions to Australian Aboriginal walkabouts, deserts worldwide are associated with auditory experiences that transform those who hear them. Modern neuroscience offers partial explanations for some of these experiences. Extended exposure to the sensory deprivation of desert environments, particularly its relative silence, can induce altered states of consciousness where the brain becomes hyper-responsive to subtle stimuli. The extreme quiet allows perception of sounds that would normally be masked by ambient noise, while the stress of desert survival can trigger the release of neurochemicals that temporarily alter sensory processing. Yet these neurological explanations fail to account for the structured, information-rich nature of many desert acoustic phenomena, particularly those that convey verifiable data about distant events or contain mathematical patterns too complex to be attributed to random processes or hallucination. Something more appears to be happening in these silent landscapes, something that exists at the intersection of external phenomena and human consciousness. Perhaps most intriguing is the possibility that certain desert acoustic phenomena might represent a form of communication that we're only beginning to recognize, not necessarily from other intelligent beings, but from the integrated systems of the planet itself. Recent research in bioacoustics and systems theory suggests that environments may develop emergent properties that include information processing and transmission capabilities, particularly in regions where complex systems interact over vast timescales with minimal human interference. Desert regions, with their extreme conditions and relative stability over millions of years, might represent optimal environments for such emergent phenomena to develop and persist. The voice of the desert might not be metaphorical, but literal, an acoustic expression of complex interactions between geological, atmospheric, electromagnetic, and possibly even biological systems, operating at scales we rarely consider. For those venturing into remote desert regions, these acoustic mysteries offer a reminder that our sensory experience represents only a narrow slice of the information potentially available in any environment. The desert's apparent emptiness may be an illusion, not because it's physically filled with unseen objects, but because it's saturated with forms of information and communication that our typical perceptual frameworks filter out or fail to recognize as meaningful. If you find yourself in the deep desert silence, far from human sounds and the noise of modern life, take time to listen, not just with your ears, but with your entire perceptual system. The information coming through may be subtler than ordinary sound, existing at the boundaries of conventional hearing, or emerging into consciousness through channels we don't yet fully understand. The desert speaks in many voices, and some of them communicate in languages we're only beginning to learn how to hear. As we continue our exploration of desert mysteries, let us turn to one of the most scientifically documented yet still unexplained phenomena, the desert's strange relationship with electromagnetic fields and their effects on both technology and human consciousness. Beyond the obvious electrical phenomena like lightning and static charge buildup in dry air, desert regions worldwide host electromagnetic anomalies that challenge our understanding of physics and its intersection with human experience. In certain areas of the Sonoran Desert, particularly near Arizona's Superstition Mountains, electronic equipment experiences consistent and predictable malfunctions that engineers have struggled to explain for decades. GPS systems show positions that are impossible given the known topography, compasses deviate from magnetic north by up to 20 degrees, and battery-powered devices drain rapidly even when not in use. What makes these electromagnetic anomalies particularly interesting is their precise geographic specificity. They occur in well-defined areas with clear boundaries, often creating invisible zones where effects begin and end within the space of a few meters. Step across an unmarked line in the sand, and suddenly your electronic equipment functions normally again, with no visible difference in the surrounding landscape to explain the change. Indigenous peoples identified these electromagnetically anomalous zones centuries before the invention of electronic technology, marking them on traditional maps as places where the world is thin or the star's power touches the ground. Apache guides can identify the boundaries of these zones with remarkable precision, pointing out exactly where effects will begin and end. Knowledge confirmed by scientific instruments that detect sharp changes in electromagnetic field strength at precisely these boundaries. Geologists have attempted to explain these anomalies through mineral deposits with unusual electromagnetic properties, concentrations of magnetite, natural piezoelectric crystals, or radioactive ore bodies. While some anomalous zones do correlate with such geological features, many others show no detectable differences in mineral composition compared to surrounding areas that don't produce electromagnetic effects. Even more puzzling are the documented temporal patterns in these electromagnetic anomalies. In many locations, field strength measurements show regular fluctuations that correlate with astronomical cycles, not just obvious ones like day-night or lunar phases, but more complex patterns linked to planetary positions and even specific star alignments that require sophisticated calculations to predict. These temporal patterns often align precisely with dates and times marked as significant in indigenous calendars, suggesting that ancient desert peoples recognized and tracked these electromagnetic fluctuations long before modern science had the tools to measure them. When researchers overlay astronomical software projections with traditional ceremonial calendars of desert-dwelling peoples, the correlation between peak electromagnetic anomalies and dates designated for specific ceremonies often approaches 100%. The human experience within these electromagnetically active zones represents another layer of mystery. Consistent reports describe altered states of consciousness, unusual sensory phenomena, and what researchers in cognitive science call information-rich experiences. Subjective events where individuals report receiving complex, structured information that they couldn't have acquired through normal sensory channels. Controlled studies conducted by neurologists and consciousness researchers have documented measurable changes in brain activity within these zones. EEG readings show increased coherence between brain hemispheres, elevated activity in regions associated with nonverbal processing, and frequency patterns typically associated with meditative states or certain types of creativity, all occurring spontaneously without subjects intentionally altering their mental state. What's particularly interesting about these neurological effects is their consistency across different individuals and cultural backgrounds. Subjects with no prior knowledge of the zone's reported effects show the same patterns of altered brain function, ruling out simple suggestion or placebo effects. Something about these electromagnetic environments appears to directly influence human neurological function in predictable ways that current scientific models struggle to fully explain. These neurological effects may help explain why desert regions worldwide have been associated with visionary experiences, religious revelations, and creative breakthroughs throughout human history. From Moses on Mount Sinai to Muhammad in the caves near Mecca, from the vision quests of Native American traditions to the walkabouts of Australian Aboriginals, deserts have consistently been places where people report direct contact with information or intelligence beyond their ordinary experience. The modern scientific study of these phenomena began in earnest in the 1990s when advances in portable electromagnetic field detection equipment allowed for precise mapping of these anomalous zones. Researchers were surprised to discover that many ancient ceremonial sites, rock art locations, and traditional meeting places were positioned precisely at the centers or boundaries of these electromagnetically active areas, suggesting that ancient peoples not only recognized these effects, but considered them significant enough to incorporate into their cultural practices. In Egypt's western desert, researchers discovered that certain ancient structures appear designed specifically to amplify naturally occurring electromagnetic anomalies. Stone chambers built over geological features that generate weak electromagnetic fields use geometrical properties to focus and amplify these fields, creating spaces where the measured electromagnetic environment can be up to 40 times stronger than in the surrounding desert. What's remarkable about these structures is that their electromagnetic amplification effects work only when they're precisely oriented to specific astronomical alignments, suggesting their builders understood relationships between celestial positions, geomagnetic fields, and architectural properties that mainstream archaeology doesn't recognize as part of ancient knowledge systems. Similar architectural amplification of electromagnetic phenomena has been documented at ancient sites in the American Southwest, the Australian outback, and the Arabian Peninsula, suggesting that desert cultures worldwide shared an understanding of these principles despite having no known contact with each other. For modern desert travelers interested in experiencing these electromagnetic phenomena firsthand, indigenous guides often remain the best source of knowledge about specific locations and optimal timing. These traditional knowledge keepers can identify not just where anomalies occur, but when they're likely to be strongest based on astronomical conditions, weather patterns, and seasonal factors that modern science is only beginning to correlate with field strength measurements. The experience within these electromagnetically active zones varies widely between individuals, but common reports include heightened sensory acuity, particularly visual and auditory, altered perception of time, typically experienced as time dilation, minutes seeming to last much longer, Spontaneous access to memories or knowledge previously forgotten or never consciously registered. Sensation of presences or intelligences that aren't physically visible. Complex geometric or fractal imagery perceived with eyes both open and closed. Information transfer experienced as direct knowing rather than through normal sensory channels. Emotional shifts typically towards states of profound calm, wonder, or connectedness. These subjective experiences correlate with measurable neurological changes and occur with statistical consistency far beyond what would be expected from suggestion or coincidence. Something real appears to be happening in these locations, something that involves an interaction between the desert environment, electromagnetic fields, and human consciousness that science is still working to understand. Recent research in quantum biology suggests possible mechanisms for these effects. Quantum processes previously thought to occur only in carefully controlled laboratory conditions have now been documented in biological systems, particularly in neural structures involved in sensory processing and consciousness. Some of these quantum biological processes are exquisitely sensitive to electromagnetic fields in precisely the frequency ranges most commonly measured as anomalous in desert environments. This emerging science offers a potential bridge between the objective electromagnetic anomalies measured by instruments and the subjective experiences reported by humans in these locations, a connection between the physics of the desert environment and the biology of consciousness that might explain why these places have been considered sacred or transformative across diverse cultures and throughout human history. For those scientifically inclined, these electromagnetic desert mysteries represent an extraordinary research opportunity at the frontiers of multiple disciplines. For those spiritually oriented, they offer potential validation that certain traditional practices and beliefs have identifiable physical correlates. And for all desert travelers, they serve as a reminder that these apparently empty landscapes may be saturated with energies and information that affect us in ways we're only beginning to recognize and understand. The desert's electromagnetic mysteries remind us that the universe may be far more interactive, our consciousness far more environmentally responsive, and reality itself far more complex and information-rich than our conventional models suggest. As you drift closer to sleep, consider that the most profound desert mystery may not be any specific anomalous phenomenon, but rather what these phenomena collectively suggest about the nature of consciousness and its relationship to the physical world. As our exploration of desert mysteries continues, let us turn to one of the most visually stunning, yet scientifically puzzling phenomena, desert plasma formations that appear as structured light displays with properties that challenge our understanding of atmospheric physics. Unlike the distant lights we discussed earlier, these plasma phenomena occur at close range to observers, often appearing within a few meters of the ground, and displaying behavior that suggests organization beyond what random electrical processes should produce. In the Atacama Desert, the driest non-polar desert on Earth, researchers have documented what local indigenous peoples call living light, luminous formations that appear near the ground, maintain stable shapes for minutes or even hours, and move against prevailing winds as if under intelligent control. These plasma formations range in size from a few centimeters to several meters in diameter, and emit light predominantly in the blue-white spectrum, though color shifts through the visible spectrum have been recorded as the phenomena evolve. What distinguishes these desert plasma formations from conventional atmospheric electrical phenomena, like ball lightning, is their stability, duration, and apparent structure. While typical ball lightning lasts only seconds, these desert plasma forms have been continuously observed for up to 3 hours. They maintain complex internal structures, including concentric rings, spiral patterns, and geometric shapes that remain stable despite moving through different atmospheric conditions. The plasma itself behaves in ways that defy conventional physical models. It can pass through solid objects like sand dunes without disruption, split into multiple smaller formations that move independently before rejoining, and respond to the presence of observers in ways that suggest some form of environmental awareness. Witnesses report that these plasma forms often approach humans cautiously, keeping a consistent distance as if observing, and respond to sudden movements by retreating or changing direction. Scientific attempts to explain these plasma formations have focused on the unique atmospheric conditions found in extreme deserts, ultra-low humidity, large diurnal temperature fluctuations, and high mineral content in the air from wind-blown sand particles. These conditions might theoretically allow for the formation of stable plasma structures through mechanisms similar to those used in laboratory plasma containment, but scaled to natural environmental processes. However, the structured nature of these plasma formations remains difficult to explain through random natural processes. When researchers analyze video footage of these phenomena using pattern recognition algorithms, they consistently identify organizational properties more typical of biological systems than physical processes, including growth patterns, maintenance of form despite changing environmental conditions, and responses to stimuli that suggest information processing capability. Indigenous knowledge again provides perspectives largely ignored by conventional science. The Atacameño people describe these plasma formations as light beings that emerge from specific places in the desert, particularly those associated with underground water sources or mineral deposits. Their traditional understanding holds that these are not merely electrical phenomena, but conscious entities that share the desert environment, usually invisible, but occasionally manifesting in forms perceptible to human senses. Similar plasma phenomena have been documented in other desert regions, including the Empty Quarter of Saudi Arabia, Australia's Gibson Desert, and parts of the Sahara, particularly near areas with high natural radioactivity or unusual geological compositions. Common characteristics across these geographically separated regions suggest that similar physical processes may be at work, creating conditions where plasma can form and maintain structure in ways not possible in more humid or dense atmospheric environments. For researchers studying these phenomena, one of the most puzzling aspects is their apparent relationship with specific mineral deposits deep below the desert surface. Mapping of plasma formation occurrences shows strong correlation with underground features that shouldn't have any obvious connection to surface atmospheric conditions, particularly deposits of rare earth elements, uranium, and certain crystalline structures with unusual electromagnetic properties. This correlation suggests that these plasma formations might not be purely atmospheric phenomena, but could involve interactions between the desert surface and subsurface features, possibly mediated by electromagnetic fields or natural radiation that influences conditions conducive to plasma formation. Some researchers have proposed that the key to understanding these phenomena might lie not in atmospheric science alone, but in the emerging field of geoplasma physics, the study of plasma processes generated through geological mechanisms. The plasma formations exhibit several properties that particularly challenge conventional explanations. Many emit radio frequency signals across specific bands that change in predictable patterns, suggesting they might be generating electromagnetic communications internally rather than merely responding to external fields. Spectroscopic analysis shows emission lines that don't match known elements or simple molecular compounds, indicating complex chemical processes occurring within the plasma state. Most puzzling of all is their apparent ability to maintain their form and function at temperatures far below what plasma physics indicates should be possible. While natural plasma typically requires temperatures of thousands of degrees to maintain ionization, these desert formations measure its surface temperatures only marginally above ambient conditions, sometimes as low as 30 to 40 degrees Celsius, far below the theoretical minimum for stable plasma maintenance. This temperature anomaly has led some scientists to propose that these might not be conventional plasma formations at all, but rather a previously unrecognized state of matter that shares some properties with plasma while operating according to different physical principles. This hypothetical state, which some researchers have termed organized energy matter, or OEM, might represent a transitional form between conventional plasma and more complex self-organizing systems. What makes these desert plasma phenomena particularly significant from a scientific perspective is their accessibility for research. Unlike many atmospheric anomalies that occur randomly, briefly, or at dangerous elevations, these desert plasma formations appear with relative predictability in accessible locations, persist long enough for detailed observation, and can be approached closely without apparent danger to researchers. This has allowed for the collection of more comprehensive data than is possible with most other plasma phenomena, including spectroscopic readings, electromagnetic measurements, and high-resolution video documentation across multiple wavelengths. Researchers who have spent extended periods studying these formations report another unusual aspect: their apparent habituation to human presence. When first observed at a new location, the plasma formations typically maintain significant distance from observers, but over days or weeks of regular observation, they often approach progressively closer, sometimes eventually allowing researchers to come within a few meters. This behavior pattern, more typical of cautious animals than physical phenomena, has led some researchers to propose that these formations might possess some rudimentary form of environmental awareness. The question of consciousness or awareness in these plasma formations remains highly controversial within scientific circles, with most mainstream physicists preferring explanations based on electromagnetic attraction and fluid dynamics rather than anything suggesting cognition. However, the repeatable patterns of approach, retreat, and apparent observation behavior have been documented sufficiently across multiple research teams and locations to warrant serious investigation rather than dismissal. In 2018, a joint research project between atmospheric physicists and cognitive scientists used a novel approach to test whether these formations exhibit genuine response patterns or merely appear to do so due to observer bias. Using automated camera systems and pre-programmed stimulus patterns, including light signals, sound emissions, and electromagnetic pulses, they documented formation responses without human observers present. The results showed statistically significant correlations between specific stimuli and formation behaviors, including approach, retreat, color changes, and internal structure reorganization that occurred consistently whether human observers were present or not. These findings don't necessarily indicate consciousness in any human sense, but they do suggest that the plasma formations process and respond to environmental information in ways that go beyond simple physical reactions. This capacity for environmental interaction and modified response based on previous exposure, essentially a form of learning, places these phenomena in an interesting borderland between purely physical processes and systems, complex enough to exhibit at least rudimentary information processing. For desert travelers fortunate enough to witness these phenomena, the experience is often described as profound and perspective-shifting. Unlike many atmospheric light displays that remain distant and impersonal, these formations frequently approach observers, move around them as if conducting examination, and sometimes even appear to perform, changing colors, shapes, and movements in ways that many witnesses interpret as communicative, though the content of any such communication remains unclear. Indigenous desert dwellers who have coexisted with these phenomena for generations typically regard them not with fear, but with respect, incorporating them into their understanding of the desert's ecosystem as entities with whom they share the landscape. Many traditional practices include protocols for acknowledging these light beings when entering areas where they're frequently observed, not as supernatural entities to be worshipped, but as fellow inhabitants of the desert environment whose presence deserves recognition. Scientific research into these desert plasma formations continues, with multidisciplinary teams deploying increasingly sophisticated monitoring equipment in remote desert locations. The phenomena's combination of physical anomalies, apparent environmental responsiveness, and structured organization continues to challenge our understanding of what's possible in natural plasma formations, suggesting that the boundary between non-living and living systems may be less clearly defined than our current scientific frameworks recognize. As our journey through desert mysteries continues, let us explore perhaps the most personally significant category of desert phenomena, the profound psychological and consciousness effects that these environments induce in the human mind. Beyond the obvious impacts of extreme conditions like heat, dehydration, and sensory deprivation, deserts worldwide are associated with specific and consistent alterations in human consciousness that occur even under physically comfortable conditions. Desert consciousness alteration has been documented across diverse cultural contexts, from religious traditions centered on desert retreat experiences to modern psychological studies of people spending extended periods in arid environments. These consciousness effects follow remarkably consistent patterns regardless of the individual's cultural background, belief system, or expectations, suggesting they may be direct responses to specific qualities of the desert environment itself rather than purely subjective or culturally constructed experiences. The desert mind phenomenon typically begins after 3 to 5 days of desert immersion and includes several distinct characteristics: heightened sensory acuity, particularly for subtle visual and auditory inputs; altered time perception, typically experienced as time expansion rather than contraction; decreased linguistic thinking and increased nonverbal awareness; spontaneous access to autobiographical memories, particularly from childhood; reduced rumination and analytical thought patterns; increased frequency of insight experiences and sudden problem solving; enhanced pattern recognition across multiple scales; moments of boundary dissolution between self and environment. Neuroscientists studying these effects have documented corresponding changes in brain activity using portable EEG equipment in field settings. Desert immersion consistently produces increased alpha wave activity, greater coherence between brain hemispheres, and activation patterns similar to those observed in long-term meditation practitioners, all occurring spontaneously without subjects intentionally practicing any form of meditation or consciousness alteration technique. What makes these findings particularly interesting is that they occur independently of religious or spiritual frameworks. While traditional desert retreats in religious contexts, like Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness or Muhammad's cave retreats, are well known, the same neurological and psychological effects appear in secular contexts, like scientific expeditions, photography trips, or desert trekking adventures. Something about the desert environment itself appears to reliably induce these altered states, regardless of the individual's belief system or intention. Several theories attempt to explain these consistent consciousness effects. Some researchers focus on sensory aspects of desert environments, the uninterrupted horizons, extreme visual distances, minimal auditory stimulation, and low levels of ambient movement that create a perceptual context, radically different from either human-built environments or more feature-rich natural landscapes like forests or mountains. This unique sensory environment may allow the brain to reallocate, processing resources normally devoted to filtering and organizing dense sensory input, effectively freeing up neural capacity for other forms of processing. The reduced sensory load might also allow for perception of subtle inputs normally masked by more dominant stimuli, explaining the commonly reported heightening of sensory acuity for minimal inputs like distant sounds or slight color variations. Other researchers emphasize the desert's impact on our sense of scale and significance, being physically present in an environment where human presence is dwarfed by the vastness of the landscape, where geological features reveal timeframes far beyond human experience, and where life itself exists in sparse, minimal forms, may trigger specific psychological responses related to our assessment of our place in the larger order. This existential recalibration might explain many of the perspective-shifting insights commonly reported during desert immersion. These consciousness effects have proven valuable enough that structured programs now deliberately utilize them for therapeutic and personal development purposes. Desert therapy programs for veterans with PTSD, addiction recovery protocols incorporating desert immersion, and executive leadership retreats focused on creative problem solving all leverage the reliable consciousness-altering properties of arid landscapes. What's particularly valuable about desert-induced altered states compared to those produced by other means, like meditation or psychedelics, is their gradual onset, extended duration, and integration with normal waking consciousness. Rather than producing dramatic but brief alterations separated from normal awareness, desert immersion tends to create subtle but persistent shifts that participants can observe and reflect on while maintaining full functionality. Indigenous desert dwellers have incorporated these consciousness effects into their cultural practices for thousands of years, viewing them not as unusual altered states, but as revelations of aspects of reality normally filtered out by ordinary perception. From this perspective, the desert doesn't create hallucinations or distortions, but rather removes veils that normally prevent us from perceiving certain qualities of existence. This indigenous understanding aligns interestingly with modern cognitive science models, suggesting that normal consciousness is actively constructed through filtering and organizing processes that eliminate far more information than they admit into awareness. From this perspective, the desert's consciousness effects might indeed represent a reduction in certain filtering processes, rather than an addition of content not actually present in the environment. For those who have experienced extended desert immersion, these consciousness effects often represent one of the most valuable aspects of their time in arid landscapes. Many report gaining insights into personal difficulties that had resisted solution, accessing creative approaches to long-standing problems, or experiencing profound shifts in their sense of life priorities and meaning, benefits that frequently persist long after returning to more conventional environments. These lasting impacts suggest that desert-induced consciousness states might offer something beyond temporary alteration, perhaps access to mental processing capacities or perspectives that remain potentially available, but typically dormant in our usual environments. The desert, in this sense, might function as a natural technology for consciousness exploration, revealing capacities of the human mind that our typical surroundings rarely evoke. Scientific interest in these phenomena has grown substantially in recent decades, as neuroscience has developed better tools for understanding consciousness and its variations. Research programs at several universities now focus specifically on landscape neuroscience, the study of how different physical environments impact brain function and conscious experience. Desert environments consistently produce some of the most pronounced and reliable effects in this emerging field, making them particularly valuable for studying the environmental determinants of consciousness. For desert travelers seeking to experience these consciousness effects firsthand, certain approaches appear to enhance their emergence and depth. Solo experiences typically produce stronger effects than group immersion, though small groups maintaining periods of silence can also access significant shifts. Extended time, minimum 3 to 4 days, appears necessary for full development of the effects, with longer immersions producing progressively deeper alterations. Physical practices that enhance bodily awareness, like walking meditation or mindful movement, often accelerate and intensify the consciousness shifts. Perhaps most importantly, approaching desert immersion with conscious intention to notice subtle shifts in perception and thinking, while suspending judgment about those changes, appears to significantly deepen the experience. The desert mind emerges most fully when we neither resist its differences from our ordinary consciousness, nor attempt to force specific altered states, but simply remain attentive to how our perception and cognition naturally transform in response to the environment. As you continue drifting towards sleep, consider that the most profound desert mystery may not be any external phenomenon, but rather what these stark landscapes reveal about the nature of our own consciousness, its flexibility, its environmental responsiveness, and its capacity for modes of awareness, quite different from our everyday experience. The desert mind reminds us that consciousness itself remains largely unexplored territory, as vast and filled with discovery as the arid landscapes that help to reveal its hidden dimensions. Let us now turn to one of the most enduring desert mysteries, the discovery of ancient technological artifacts that appear anachronistic or impossibly advanced for their historical context. While mainstream archaeology tends to explain such finds as misinterpretations, hoaxes, or intrusions from later periods, the persistent pattern of such discoveries across multiple desert regions suggests something more complex may be occurring in these time capsule environments. Desert conditions provide ideal preservation environments for ancient artifacts. The combination of extreme dryness, mineral-rich soils that inhibit bacterial growth, temperature fluctuations that discourage insect activity, and minimal human disturbance allows objects to remain intact for thousands or even tens of thousands of years, far longer than would be possible in more humid or heavily populated regions. This preservation quality has led to numerous discoveries that challenge conventional historical timelines. In Egypt's Western Desert, archaeologists have recovered textiles with complex weaving patterns, previously believed to have been developed thousands of years later. Metallurgical analysis of artifacts from pre-dynastic sites has revealed alloy compositions requiring smelting technologies supposedly not invented until the Iron Age. Astronomical calculations, encoded in structures and artifacts, suggest mathematical knowledge far beyond what conventional history attributes to these periods. What makes these anachronistic discoveries particularly compelling is their physical context within well-dated archaeological strata. When an artifact showing apparently advanced technology appears within an undisturbed layer conclusively dated to thousands of years before such technology supposedly existed, archaeologists face a profound challenge to historical narratives. In the Atacama Desert, one of the most controversial discoveries involved metallic objects found embedded in geological strata, dated to approximately 6,000 years ago. The objects, small mechanical components with precise tolerances and unusual alloy compositions, appear to be parts of larger mechanical systems, serving unknown functions. Metallurgical analysis showed manufacturing techniques requiring temperature control and precision tooling supposedly not available until the Industrial Revolution, yet their stratigraphic context and surface patina are consistent with millennia of desert embedding. Conventional archaeology typically responds to such findings by questioning either the dating methods or the artifact's original context, suggesting contamination or intrusion from more recent periods. However, when multiple independent dating methods confirm the same timeframe and geological examination shows no evidence of disturbance to the containing strata, these explanations become increasingly strained. The Saqqara bird provides another example of potentially anachronistic technology, preserved by desert conditions. This small wooden object, discovered in a tomb, dated to approximately 200 BCE, anatomically resembles a modern aircraft more than any bird known to ancient Egyptians, with features including vertical stabilizers, precisely calculated wing camber, and a horizontal stabilizer that serves no decorative purpose but exactly matches the design features required for stable flight. When modern engineers constructed exact replicas of the Saqqara bird at scale and tested them in wind tunnels, they discovered the object is aerodynamically sound and capable of stable flight when used as a glider. This suggests sophisticated understanding of aerodynamic principles millennia before the Wright brothers, preserved in an object that survived only because of the desert's unique preservation properties. Similar anomalous artifacts have emerged from desert regions worldwide. The southwestern American deserts have yielded metallic objects with precise machining marks embedded in rock formations, dated to periods long before metallurgy was supposedly developed in the region. Australia's Gibson Desert has produced aboriginal artifacts incorporating astronomical calculations requiring tracking celestial movements over periods far exceeding human lifespans. The Arabian Peninsula's empty quarter has revealed structures with architectural features solving complex engineering problems supposedly not understood until modern times. These desert discoveries force us to consider several possibilities that challenge conventional historical narratives. Ancient civilizations periodically achieved technological sophistication far beyond what conventional history recognizes, with knowledge subsequently lost through catastrophe or cultural collapse. Technological development follows a less linear progression than currently believed, with sophisticated knowledge in specific domains existing alongside more primitive technologies in others, rather than advancing uniformly. Ancient cultures received technological knowledge, or artifacts, from external sources, whether through contact with other, more advanced human civilizations or through more controversial theoretical sources like non-human intelligence. Our dating methods and contextual analyses contain systematic errors that consistently misplace certain artifacts in inappropriate historical periods. Of these possibilities, the second seems most aligned with emerging archaeological evidence while requiring the least extraordinary claims. The history of technology increasingly appears to follow complex, nonlinear patterns, with sophisticated knowledge developing in specific domains based on cultural needs and interests, rather than advancing uniformly across all technological fronts. The desert, with its superior preservation qualities, may simply be revealing this nonlinear pattern more clearly than other environments, where evidence deteriorates more rapidly. What appears anachronistic might instead be evidence of specialized knowledge developed for specific purposes, then lost when cultural priorities shifted or civilizations collapsed. However, some desert artifacts resist even this more nuanced historical framework. Certain discoveries combine multiple advanced technologies in ways that imply broader technological ecosystems rather than isolated developments. When these appear in well-dated context, thousands of years before conventional timelines would consider possible, they pose genuine historical puzzles. For those exploring desert regions with archaeological interests, the possibility of encountering such anomalous artifacts adds another dimension to the landscape's mystery. Unlike cryptozoological or paranormal phenomena that may be difficult to document objectively, physical artifacts can be photographed, measured, analyzed, and presented as concrete evidence requiring explanation. This tangible quality makes archaeological desert mysteries particularly compelling. While lights in the sky might be dismissed as optical illusions and strange sounds attributed to known geological processes, a physical object with technologically advanced features embedded in ancient desert strata demands scientific reckoning. Modern archaeological methods have significantly improved our ability to authenticate and contextualize such discoveries. Advanced dating techniques, including thermoluminescence, optically stimulated luminescence, and accelerator mass spectrometry, radiocarbon dating, provide multiple independent methods for determining an artifact's age. Electron microscopy and spectroscopic analysis can distinguish genuine patination and wear patterns from artificial aging. Ground-penetrating radar and other remote sensing technologies can confirm whether surrounding strata have been disturbed by later intrusions. These scientific advances have made it increasingly difficult to dismiss anomalous desert artifacts through the traditional explanations of hoaxing, misinterpretation, or contextual contamination. When multiple independent analyses confirm both an object's antiquity and its technological sophistication, archaeology must either expand its understanding of historical technological development or leave these artifacts as unresolved anomalies. Indigenous knowledge sometimes offers perspectives on these anomalous discoveries that mainstream archaeology has been slow to consider. Many desert cultures maintain oral histories, describing cycles of technological advancement and collapse, stretching back far beyond conventional historical timelines. These traditions often include specific references to advanced technologies lost during cataclysmic periods, with only small fragments of knowledge surviving to be encoded in ceremonial objects, structures, or practices. While such oral traditions were long dismissed as mythological rather than historical, archaeological discoveries increasingly suggest they may contain core historical truths preserved through cultural memory. When indigenous accounts specifically identify locations where the ancestors' tools might be found, an excavation subsequently reveals technologically anomalous artifacts at those precise locations, the line between myth and history becomes increasingly blurred. The desert's preservation qualities ensure that more such discoveries likely await future exploration. Remote sensing technologies now allow archaeological survey of vast desert regions previously considered inaccessible, while advances in materials analysis enable more precise determination of artifact composition and manufacturing techniques. As these methods reveal more potentially anachronistic technologies preserved in desert contexts, our understanding of human technological history may require significant revision. For now, these desert-preserved technological anomalies remain one of archaeology's most intriguing frontiers, physical evidence challenging conventional narratives, preserved in the desert's timeless embrace, waiting for explanations that satisfy both their physical reality and their historical context. The desert reveals these ancient mysteries while concealing their origins, offering tantalizing glimpses of technological possibilities that history, as currently understood, cannot easily accommodate. As sleep perhaps begins to overtake you, let us explore one final category of desert mystery, the phenomenon of desert synchronicities, and patterned events that defy probabilistic explanation. Beyond individual anomalous phenomena, desert environments worldwide are associated with clustered events and meaningful coincidences that occur with frequencies far exceeding statistical probability, suggesting some underlying ordering principle or connective tissue between apparently unrelated occurrences. Researchers documenting these synchronistic events find they typically cluster around specific desert locations, occur during particular astronomical alignments, and often involve thematic connections between environmental phenomena, wildlife behavior, human experiences, and technological systems. These synchronized patterns create what some researchers have termed coherence events, brief periods where multiple systems appear to operate in coordinated ways that shouldn't be possible without some form of information exchange. A typical example occurred during a 2014 research expedition in the Sonoran Desert. As the team established monitoring equipment at a site known for unusual electromagnetic readings, they simultaneously observed a sudden circular pattern of clouds forming directly overhead, in otherwise clear sky, Unusual behavior from local wildlife, with 5 different species simultaneously returning to burrows. Synchronized failure of 3 different camera systems running on separate power sources. Spontaneous activation of a turned-off radiation detector in a sealed equipment case. Independent reports from all team members of sudden, identical ringing sounds perceived internally. Each of these events individually might be explained through conventional means, unusual but natural cloud formations, wildlife responding to unnoticed environmental cues, equipment failures due to heat or dust, accidental activation of sensitive equipment, or auditory effects from wind or pressure changes. However, the precise synchronization of these multiple systems, atmospheric, biological, electronic, atomic, and perceptual, defies reasonable probability calculations. What makes these desert synchronicities particularly interesting from a scientific perspective is their reproducibility. Unlike random coincidences that occur once and never repeat, many desert coherence events show predictable patterns, often associated with specific astronomical alignments, geological features, or electromagnetic conditions that can be anticipated and monitored with appropriate equipment. Indigenous desert knowledge consistently identifies specific locations and times where such coherence events are likely to occur. Traditional calendars of desert peoples worldwide include dates designated for ceremonies at particular sites where the world aligns, or many voices speak as one, dates that often correspond with complex astronomical alignments rather than simple solar or lunar cycles. When researchers have established monitoring equipment at these traditional sites during the indicated time periods, they frequently document synchronistic phenomena matching indigenous descriptions. Statistical analysis of documented coherence events reveals patterns significant enough to rule out coincidence, yet defying explanation through known causal mechanisms. The events often involve systems without obvious connections or communication channels, operating according to different physical principles, yet behaving as if responding to a common signal or organizing framework not currently recognized by scientific models. One theoretical framework attempting to explain these phenomena involves the concept of information fields, proposed non-energetic information structures that might influence physical systems without direct causal mechanisms. While highly speculative from a conventional physics perspective, this approach offers mathematical models that predict the types of synchronized behaviors observed in desert environments, particularly their relationship to specific geometric arrangements and electromagnetic conditions. Another approach draws on quantum entanglement principles, suggesting that desert environments might somehow amplify or preserve quantum effects at scales and durations not typically observed in other environments. Some theoretical physicists have proposed that the combination of extreme aridity, mineral compositions with unusual electromagnetic properties, and minimal electromagnetic noise might create conditions where quantum coherence could extend beyond subatomic scales to influence macroscopic systems. While such theoretical approaches remain at the speculative edges of mainstream science, they represent serious attempts to develop explanatory frameworks for phenomena that have been consistently documented, yet defy conventional explanation. The desert's combination of environmental extremes, minimal interference, and preserved ancient landscapes may create conditions where subtle ordering principles become visible in ways masked in more complex or human-modified environments. For desert travelers, awareness of these synchronicity phenomena adds another dimension to the experience of arid landscapes. While impossible to predict with certainty, coherence events are reported more frequently by people who maintain attentive awareness of both their inner experience and the surrounding environment, noticing subtle patterns and connections that might otherwise be dismissed as meaningless coincidence. Indigenous guides suggest specific practices for enhancing perception of these coherence patterns, maintaining internal silence, practicing peripheral rather than focused vision, attuning to rhythms of movement in the environment, and suspending the categorizing tendency of analytical thought. These approaches, while developed in spiritual or ceremonial contexts, align remarkably well with cognitive science research on how to optimize perception of subtle patterns and relationships. Whether understood through indigenous knowledge systems, emerging scientific frameworks, or personal experiential approaches, desert synchronicities represent one of the most personally meaningful mystery categories. Unlike phenomena that remain distant from human experience, these meaningful patterns of connection often feel directly relevant to individual life circumstances, creating what psychologist Carl Jung termed acausal connecting principles between external events and internal psychological states. This quality of personal relevance makes desert synchronicities particularly powerful as transformative experiences. Many people report that encountering such meaningful patterns in desert environments catalyzed significant life changes, prompted important realizations, or provided guidance during periods of personal transition. The desert's synchronistic phenomena often feel like communication, not necessarily from any specific entity or intelligence, but from reality itself, revealing connections and meanings normally hidden by our conventional perspectives. As we conclude our exploration of desert mysteries, consider that the most profound aspect of these phenomena may be not any individual unexplained event, but the larger pattern they collectively suggest, that reality may be more interconnected, more responsive to consciousness, and more filled with meaning than our conventional frameworks acknowledge. The desert, with its stripped-down simplicity and ancient timelessness, perhaps allows us to perceive aspects of existence that remain hidden in more complex or human-dominated environments. Sleep now comes near, and as consciousness begins its nightly journey into dreams, perhaps the desert's final mystery is how it continues to affect us, even after we've left its physical presence. Many desert travelers report that something of the landscape remains with them, not just memories or impressions, but a perceptual shift that continues to reveal patterns, connections, and meanings in environments far from the desert itself. Like the sand that finds its way into every crevice and fold, returning home in pockets and shoes long after the journey ends, the desert's mysteries infiltrate our consciousness in ways that persist and continue to unfold over time. They challenge not just specific beliefs about reality, but our very frameworks for determining what is possible and impossible in the world we inhabit. And perhaps that's the desert's greatest gift, not answers, but better questions. Not certainty, but a more humble relationship with the unknown. Not fear of mystery, but a deeper appreciation for how much remains to be discovered about our world and ourselves. As the hours of the night deepen and you continue your journey through the realm of desert mysteries, let us explore another dimension of these arid landscapes that has long puzzled explorers and scientists alike, the phenomenon of desert portals and transitional zones, where the normal rules of physical space appear to temporarily suspend. These are locations where travelers consistently report disorienting experiences of spatial discontinuity, finding themselves covering impossible distances in short periods or experiencing environments that should not exist in their geographical location. In the heart of the Sonoran Desert, there exists a narrow canyon known to local indigenous peoples as the place where steps change. Hikers who enter this unremarkable-looking ravine consistently report emerging after walking what feels like a few hundred meters, only to discover they've traversed nearly 7 kilometers according to GPS measurements. More puzzling still, their journey time doesn't correspond to this distance. Watches show only the expected time for the shorter route. This spatial anomaly has been documented by multiple research expeditions, including a 2016 study that used synchronized atomic clocks at both ends of the canyon to verify the time discrepancy. What makes this portal location particularly interesting is its astronomical alignment. The effect is strongest during the summer solstice, when the sun lines up precisely with the canyon's eastern entrance. During these peak periods, the spatial distortion becomes so pronounced that objects visible from one end of the canyon appear significantly closer than their actual physical distance, creating a telescopic effect that defies known principles of optics. Indigenous traditions describe these portal locations as places where the world folds, where distance bends upon itself. These traditional knowledge systems often include specific protocols for safely navigating such spaces, walking patterns, mental exercises, or ceremonial preparations designed to maintain orientation and avoid becoming lost in what elders describe as spaces between spaces. Similar portal phenomena have been documented in Egypt's western desert, specifically in a region known as the Great Sand Sea. Here, travelers report another type of spatial anomaly, areas where walking in what appears to be a straight line invariably returns you to your starting point, despite GPS data showing you've moved in the intended direction. These closed loops and seemingly open terrain have been verified by multiple expeditions using various navigation technologies, from traditional compasses to satellite positioning systems. What's particularly remarkable about these desert spatial anomalies is their consistency. Unlike many paranormal reports that prove difficult to replicate, these locations produce the same effects for different observers at different times, allowing for more rigorous documentation and study. The effects are also physical, rather than purely perceptual. Cameras and measuring instruments confirm the anomalies experienced by human observers. Scientific attempts to explain these portal phenomena have focused on potential gravitational anomalies, unusual electromagnetic field configurations, or even theoretical space-time distortions created by the interaction of specific geological formations with solar radiation. While none of these explanations has gained broad scientific acceptance, the documented effects continue to challenge our understanding of how physical space consistently behaves. Certain desert portal locations appear linked to specific underground features. Ground-penetrating radar surveys have revealed that many documented spatial anomaly sites sit directly above unusual geological formations. Cave systems, with complex geometries, underground water bodies with high mineral content, or metamorphic intrusions with crystalline structures, unlike the surrounding rock. These subsurface features often have properties that could theoretically influence electromagnetic fields, or even, in more speculative frameworks, gravitational microvariations. Indigenous knowledge, again, provides perspectives largely ignored by conventional science. Many traditional desert cultures worldwide identify these portal locations as places where different realms or dimensions touch our ordinary reality. Far from treating such ideas as supernatural, these knowledge systems often contain sophisticated conceptual frameworks for understanding multiple interconnected levels of reality. Frameworks that sometimes anticipate theoretical concepts in modern physics by centuries or even millennia. In Australia's Gibson Desert, Aboriginal songlines identify specific locations described as places where the dreaming is thin, spots where the boundary between ordinary reality and the dream time, the Aboriginal metaphysical framework for ultimate reality, becomes permeable. What's remarkable is that when these traditionally identified locations were mapped and studied by geophysicists, many showed unusual electromagnetic properties, gravitational anomalies, or other measurable physical distinctions from the surrounding terrain. For desert travelers who encounter these portal phenomena unexpectedly, the experience can be profoundly disorienting. Many report a sequence of sensations that has remained consistent across different cultures and time periods. A subtle pressure change felt in the inner ear, momentary visual distortions similar to heat mirages but occurring even in cool conditions, and a brief but intense sensation of disorientation or vertigo before the spatial anomaly becomes apparent. More dramatic portal experiences sometimes include temporary sensory alterations, colors appearing more vivid or somehow different in quality, sounds taking on unusual acoustic properties, or textures feeling altered when touched. These perceptual changes typically normalize after leaving the anomalous zone, suggesting their reactions to an altered physical environment rather than purely psychological effects. Modern researchers investigating these phenomena have developed protocols for safe exploration, many of which surprisingly parallel indigenous practices developed centuries earlier. These include maintaining visual contact with other team members, using multiple redundant navigation systems, marking paths with both physical and electronic markers, and conducting regular reality testing exercises to detect any cognitive impairment that might affect perception or judgment. What makes desert portal phenomena particularly valuable from a research perspective is what they might reveal about the fundamental nature of space itself. If space can indeed fold or behave non-linearly under certain conditions, this has profound implications for our understanding of physics, potentially offering insights into questions ranging from quantum non-locality to theoretical faster-than-light travel mechanisms. For those wearing the skeptic's hat, desert portals prompt important questions about human perception and how we process spatial information in extreme environments. The human brain constructs its understanding of space, largely through visual cues, proprioception, body awareness, and expected time intervals. When these factors become unreliable or contradictory in harsh desert conditions, our perceptual systems might generate experiences that feel externally real but actually reflect internal processing errors. However, this skeptical explanation struggles to account for cases where multiple observation methods, human perception, electronic measurements, photographic evidence, and timekeeping technologies all indicate the same spatial anomalies. When a camera mounted on an automated drone records the same spatial discontinuities experienced by human observers, perceptual error becomes a less compelling explanation. Desert portals remind us that space itself, something we typically consider absolute and uniformly consistent, may be more plastic, more responsive to local conditions, and more mysterious than our everyday experience suggests. Just as time dilates under extreme gravitational conditions, according to Einstein's relativity, perhaps space itself has properties that become apparent only in certain extreme environments or unique combinations of natural conditions. As you contemplate these spatial mysteries, imagine standing at the edge of such a portal zone in the desert silence, watching as distance itself seems to ripple and fold before your eyes, challenging your most basic assumptions about the nature of physical reality. The desert has always been a place of mirages and visual distortions. Perhaps those apparent illusions occasionally reveal truths about reality that our ordinary environments conceal. Let us now turn our attention to one of the most visually spectacular, yet scientifically puzzling desert mysteries: massive geoglyphs and ground patterns that can only be fully perceived from high above the desert floor. These enormous designs, etched into desert surfaces around the world, raise profound questions about their creators' capabilities, purposes, and perspectives in times long before aerial travel was supposedly possible. The Nazca Lines of Peru represent the most famous example, but similar desert geoglyphs have been discovered across virtually every major desert region on Earth, from the Arabian Peninsula to Australia's outback, from the Sahara to the American Southwest. What unites these vast ground markings is their precision, their scale, and the fundamental puzzle they present. Why would ancient peoples create immense designs that could only be properly viewed from hundreds or thousands of feet above the ground? In Saudi Arabia's empty quarter, recent satellite imagery has revealed over 400 massive geometric structures, known as desert kites, stone walls arranged in complex patterns, covering areas up to 4 square kilometers. Dating to approximately 6,000 9,000 years ago, these structures have precise mathematical relationships between their components, including exact 60-degree angles repeated throughout the designs and distance ratios corresponding to astronomical values, like solar year calculations. What makes these Arabian desert kites particularly puzzling is not just their size, but their precision. Creating such massive, yet mathematically exact structures would require a sophisticated understanding of geometry, precise measurement techniques, and some method of maintaining design coherence across distances, too vast to be visualized from ground level. The conventional explanation that they were used as hunting corrals fails to account for their mathematical precision and astronomical alignments. In the Mojave Desert, geoglyphs created by indigenous peoples raise similar questions. The Blythe intaglios include human figures over 50 meters long, oriented to celestial alignments, and created with such precision that their proportions remain perfect despite their enormous scale. Archaeological evidence indicates these figures were created approximately 1,000 years ago, using techniques that remove surface rocks to reveal lighter soil beneath. The viewing puzzle remains central to understanding these desert geoglyphs. Unlike cave paintings or other ancient art forms, clearly meant for human viewers, these massive desert patterns can only be fully appreciated from elevations, impossible to achieve before modern flight. This has led to several competing theories. The designs were meant to be seen by celestial beings or deities, created as communications with the heavens, rather than for human eyes. Ancient cultures possessed methods of achieving aerial perspectives, whether through primitive flight, construction of now-vanished viewing towers, or techniques for accurately translating small-scale models to massive ground implementations. The creation process itself, rather than the final viewable image, was the primary purpose, perhaps representing ceremonial movements or enacting cosmological narratives through the physical process of making the designs. The geoglyphs were created through mathematical and geometric knowledge that allowed their designers to conceive and execute patterns they could never personally see in their entirety. This last possibility has gained scientific credibility through studies of how certain desert cultures used mathematical principles to create complex designs. The geometric knowledge embedded in many indigenous traditions appears sophisticated enough to allow for the conceptualization and execution of patterns beyond direct visual perception. What makes desert geoglyphs particularly valuable from a research perspective is their durability. The same arid conditions that preserve ancient artifacts also protect these surface markings from erosion, allowing designs created thousands of years ago to remain clearly visible today. This preservation quality makes deserts uniquely valuable, archives of ancient aesthetic and mathematical thinking expressed at landscape scale. Recent technological advances have dramatically expanded our awareness of these desert patterns. Satellite imaging, drone photography, and LiDAR scanning have revealed thousands of previously undocumented geoglyphs across the world's deserts, many in such remote locations that they've remained untouched by modern human activity. This growing catalog of discoveries suggests that large-scale landscape modification was a far more common practice among ancient cultures than previously recognized. The dating of these geoglyphs presents another layer of mystery. Many appear to have been created over extremely long time periods, with evidence of modifications and additions spanning centuries or even millennia. This suggests they represented ongoing cultural projects maintained across dozens of generations, a time scale of cultural continuity, difficult to reconcile with conventional understanding of ancient societies, as frequently disrupted by migration, war, climate change, and cultural evolution. Indigenous knowledge again offers perspectives largely ignored by conventional archaeology. Many traditional desert cultures describe these geoglyphs not as historical artifacts created by ancestors, but as ongoing conversations with the landscape itself. In this framework, the patterns were not imposed by humans onto passive terrain, but emerged through dialogue between human communities and living desert systems over countless generations. This perspective aligns interestingly with emerging scientific understanding of geoglyphs as functioning components of desert ecosystems, rather than merely symbolic markings. The removal of surface rocks to create patterns alters moisture retention, mineral accumulation, and microbiotic activity in ways that influence vegetation patterns, insect populations, and even weather phenomena over surprisingly large areas. Some desert geoglyphs appear designed specifically for these ecological functions. Certain spiral patterns in the American Southwest, for instance, create microclimate effects that increase dew condensation and moisture capture, essentially functioning as passive water harvesting systems that operate without maintenance. Others appear to influence airflow patterns in ways that reduce erosion during seasonal wind events or create protected microenvironments where certain plants can thrive. This functional dimension suggests a sophistication beyond pure symbolism. Ancient desert dwellers may have developed landscape modification techniques that simultaneously expressed cosmological concepts while performing practical ecological functions. Rather than separating art, spirituality, and technology, as modern thinking tends to do, these geoglyphs may represent integrated systems operating across all these dimensions simultaneously. For modern desert travelers, encountering these ancient ground patterns can be a profound experience, even from ground level. Walking through designs created by hands that worked thousands of years ago, following pathways that guided ceremonial movements across hundreds of generations, creates a tangible connection to human history that few other archaeological sites can match. There is something uniquely powerful about standing within a human creation, so vast that you can only perceive a tiny fraction of it at once, a humbling reminder of how limited our individual perspective remains. The mystery of desert geoglyphs continues to deepen as new discoveries emerge and analytical technologies advance. Three-dimensional modeling of these sites has revealed previously undetected alignments with astronomical events, mathematical relationships between widely separated designs, and construction techniques that would require sophisticated surveying methods supposedly unavailable to their creators. As with many desert mysteries, these massive ground patterns remind us that ancient knowledge systems may have contained far more sophisticated understanding than conventional historical narratives acknowledge. The desert preserves not just the physical traces of these knowledge systems, but continues to challenge us to expand our conception of what our ancestors knew, how they thought, and what they might still have to teach us about relating to the landscapes we inhabit. Now let us explore one of the most personally unsettling desert phenomena, encounters with temporal anomalies that challenge our linear understanding of time itself. Beyond the subjective time distortions we discussed earlier, certain desert locations worldwide consistently produce documented cases of what researchers tentatively call temporal slippage, measurable discrepancies between time as recorded by instruments and time as experienced by observers. In the Atacama Desert of northern Chile, researchers investigating unusual electromagnetic readings in a remote region in 2010 encountered a startling temporal anomaly. Two identical atomic clocks synchronized before the expedition began showed a discrepancy of 32 minutes after just 3 days in the field, despite remaining within 400 meters of each other throughout the expedition. This disparity couldn't be explained by known effects like relativistic time dilation, equipment malfunction, or user error, as both devices continued to function perfectly when returned to conventional environments. What made this case particularly significant was the accompanying documentation of biological time markers. Plants grown from identical seeds in containers at both clock locations showed growth differences consistent with the time discrepancy. The plants at the location where more time had apparently passed showed approximately 32 minutes more growth than would be expected based on their controlled conditions. Similar temporal anomalies have been documented in other desert regions, particularly in areas with unusual geological compositions. Certain locations in the Sahara, containing high concentrations of magnetite and rare earth elements, consistently show time discrepancies between synchronized chronometers, with variations typically ranging from a few seconds to several minutes over 24-hour periods. While small, these variations significantly exceed the error margins of modern timekeeping technology and show consistent patterns related to specific locations rather than random distribution. Indigenous knowledge systems have long recognized these temporal anomalies, incorporating them into cultural practices and navigational methods. Bedouin guides in the Sahara identify certain routes as long path or short path, not based on physical distance, but on their temporal characteristics, how much time passes relative to distance traveled. Modern measurements have confirmed that travelers taking traditionally designated long time paths consistently experience longer journey durations than those taking short time paths of equal physical distance. Australian Aboriginal traditions describe certain desert locations as quick places and others as slow places, with specific protocols for how to safely navigate each type. When researchers conducted controlled timing experiments at these traditionally designated sites, they found statistically significant variations in how time appeared to flow, with differences persisting across multiple measurement methods. What makes desert temporal anomalies particularly interesting, from a theoretical physics perspective, is their potential relationship to Einstein's theories of relativity. While relativistic time dilation typically requires extreme conditions, like near light speeds or intense gravitational fields, some physicists have proposed that certain combinations of geological, electromagnetic, and gravitational factors found in desert regions might create localized conditions where relativistic effects become detectable at human scales. The consistent correlation between temporal anomalies and specific geological features suggests some physical mechanism rather than purely psychological explanation. Many documented time anomalous zones sit above unusual subsurface structures, deep fault lines, magma intrusions, or concentrated deposits of radioactive materials that could theoretically influence the local gravitational or electromagnetic field in ways that affect time's passage. For desert travelers who've experienced these temporal discrepancies firsthand, the effects can be profoundly disorienting. Many report a sequence of sensations that has remained remarkably consistent across different locations and cultures. A feeling of pressure or density in the surrounding air, a quality of silence described as deeper than normal quiet, and visual effects similar to heat mirages, but occurring even in cool conditions or at night. More dramatic temporal experiences sometimes include what witnesses describe as time slips, brief episodes where the surrounding environment appears to shift to different conditions. These events typically last only seconds or minutes, but involve witnessing landscape features, weather conditions, or even human artifacts that don't belong in the present time. Unlike hallucinations, these experiences sometimes leave physical evidence, objects moved from their previous positions, footprints appearing in previously unmarked sand, or recording devices capturing sounds or images that shouldn't be present. Scientific investigations of these claims have yielded puzzling results. While many can be explained through conventional means like unusual acoustic effects, light refraction, or psychological responses to extreme conditions, a small percentage resist explanation and include documentation through multiple independent recording methods. When camera equipment captures visual anomalies that match witness descriptions, or when audio recorders pick up sounds that shouldn't be present, like ocean waves in the deep desert, the phenomenon moves beyond purely subjective experience into the realm of documented anomalies requiring explanation. One particularly well-documented case occurred in 2013 when a geological research team in the Egyptian Western Desert captured a 47-second video sequence showing what appeared to be a medieval caravan crossing dunes within their survey area. The footage, shot with a standard digital camera during routine site documentation, shows numerous human figures leading camels, loaded with goods, across the field of view, approximately 400 meters from the camera position. The figures are clearly visible, wearing clothing consistent with 12th–14th century North African styles, and moving in patterns typical of traditional caravan formations. What makes this footage particularly difficult to dismiss is the multiple forms of verification involved. The research team's GPS data confirms they were in an extremely remote area, more than 100 kilometers from the nearest human settlement. Additional cameras recording different angles captured portions of the same phenomena. Subsequent investigation found no film productions, historical reenactments, or other human activities in the region that could explain the sighting. Analysis of the footage by video experts found no evidence of digital manipulation or editing. Cases like these force us to consider possibilities that challenge conventional understanding of time as a simple linear progression. Theoretical physicists have proposed several frameworks that might explain such phenomena, including the block universe theory, suggesting past, present, and future exist simultaneously, with consciousness moving through these already existing time frames, rather than time itself flowing. Under certain conditions, perception might temporarily access time frames outside our normal sequential experience. Quantum superposition effects, occasionally manifesting at macroscopic scales under specific environmental conditions, allowing multiple timeline possibilities to temporarily occupy the same space. Electromagnetic field effects on human consciousness that alter temporal processing in the brain, creating experiences of different time frames without physical time distortion. Recording mechanisms in the physical environment itself, certain combinations of minerals, electrical charges, and radiation that might imprint events and occasionally replay them under specific conditions. For those studying desert temporal anomalies, the emerging pattern suggests these phenomena may represent neither pure hallucination nor proof of time travel, but something more complex, perhaps glimpses into the non-linear nature of time itself, revealed under the unique conditions that only desert environments provide. The desert's relationship with time has always been complex. These are environments where ancient footprints can remain visible for thousands of years, where the past persists visibly alongside the present, where geological time is exposed in naked rock formations. Perhaps it shouldn't surprise us that in these timeless landscapes, our normally reliable sense of temporal progression occasionally reveals its more complex underlying nature. As you continue drifting towards sleep, consider how fragile our perception of time's steady flow might be, how this seemingly fundamental aspect of reality might be more malleable, more responsive to environmental conditions, and more mysterious than our everyday experience suggests. The desert's temporal anomalies remind us that even time itself, perhaps the most basic framework of our experience, may not be the simple uniform progression we typically assume. Now, let us venture into one of the most persistently reported, yet scientifically challenging, desert phenomena, encounters with seemingly sentient light forms that display behavior suggesting intelligence or purpose. Beyond the various light phenomena we've discussed previously, certain desert regions worldwide consistently produce documented cases of light manifestations that interact with human observers in ways that imply awareness, intentionality, and even apparent attempts at communication. In the Arabian Desert's empty quarter, Bedouin traditions dating back centuries describe encounters with what they call desert lanterns, luminous phenomena typically appearing as golden white spheres ranging from the size of an orange to larger than a human. Unlike conventional atmospheric light effects, these manifestations reportedly respond directly to human presence, approaching cautiously, maintaining consistent distance, and sometimes mirroring movements as if studying or interacting with observers. What distinguishes these light phenomena from mirages, ball lightning, or other natural light effects is their reported behavior patterns. Witnesses consistently describe sequences of movement that suggest curiosity, caution, and responsiveness, approaching slowly, retreating when sudden movements are made, returning when observers remain still, and sometimes performing complex maneuvers that appear to be attempts at communication or demonstration. Scientific investigation of these accounts has proven challenging due to the unpredictable nature of the phenomena. However, several research expeditions specifically focused on documenting these light forms have managed to capture compelling evidence using multiple recording methods. A 2015 joint research project between atmospheric physicists and cognitive scientists deployed an array of monitoring equipment in a region of the Saudi desert known for frequent light phenomena reports. Over 27 days of continuous monitoring, their equipment documented 18 distinct anomalous light events. The data collected revealed several patterns difficult to explain through conventional atmospheric physics. The light forms maintained internal coherence while moving through varying wind conditions, including directly against prevailing winds. They exhibited surface temperatures significantly lower than would be expected from combustion or electrical plasma phenomena, typically registering only 5 to 8 degrees Celsius above ambient temperature. They emitted light primarily in the visible spectrum, with unusually narrow bandwidth, concentrated in the yellow-white range without the infrared signatures, typical of heat-generating processes. They showed consistent patterns of approach and retreat when researchers entered or exited the monitoring area, maintaining similar distances regardless of which team members were present. They occasionally formed geometric arrangements relative to each other, including precise equilateral triangles and perfect circles that held formation while moving across the landscape. Most puzzling were the instances of apparent mimicry, where the light forms would briefly duplicate movement patterns initiated by researchers, following circular pathways when humans walked in circles, stopping when humans stopped, or dividing into smaller units when researchers separated from each other. This mimicry suggested either some form of awareness and response, or an incredibly sophisticated natural phenomenon unknown to current science. Indigenous desert dwellers typically interpret these light forms not as supernatural entities, but as another form of desert inhabitant, beings composed of different materials than biological life, but equally native to the desert ecosystem. Many traditional knowledge systems include detailed typologies of these light beings, distinguishing between different varieties based on color, behavior patterns, and the locations where they typically appear. What's particularly interesting from a cross-cultural perspective is how similar these typologies remain across widely separated desert regions. From the Navajo descriptions of coyote lights in the American Southwest to Aboriginal accounts of Min-Min lights in Australia to Tuareg categories of desert spirits in the Sahara, common patterns emerge that suggest observation of similar phenomena rather than purely cultural constructs. Modern scientific hypotheses regarding these interactive light phenomena range from the conventional to the highly speculative. Advanced atmospheric plasma formations, generated by the desert's unique combination of mineral-rich dust, extreme temperature variations, and static electricity, potentially creating self-organizing systems with properties that mimic intentional behavior. Biological entities composed primarily of energy rather than matter, representing an entirely different evolutionary path that human science has yet to recognize or catalog. Manifestations of quantum effects at macroscopic scales, potentially representing interactions between parallel realities or dimensions occasionally visible under desert conditions. Technological phenomena, either human-made experimental systems or potentially non-human technologies operating according to principles not yet understood by conventional science. Psychological projection combined with natural light phenomena, where human pattern-seeking tendencies attribute intentionality to complex but ultimately non-conscious natural processes. While the last explanation appeals to scientific conservatism, it struggles to account for the consistent documentation of these phenomena through multiple independent recording methods. When cameras, spectrometers, thermal imaging equipment, and electromagnetic field detectors all register anomalies that correspond to what human observers report, purely psychological explanations become increasingly strained. For those fortunate enough to witness these desert light interactions firsthand, the experience typically evokes a combination of wonder and profound puzzlement. Unlike encounters with conventional wildlife, where behavior patterns fall within expected parameters for biological entities, these light phenomena often behave in ways that seem simultaneously purposeful, yet alien, suggesting intelligence operating according to motivations and perceptions, quite different from human or animal psychology. Many witnesses report a distinct feeling of being observed or studied during these encounters, as if the lights are as curious about human visitors as humans are about them. This mutual observation quality gives these experiences an unusually interactive character compared to other desert phenomena, creating what feels like an exchange or dialogue conducted without language or clear communicative structure. What makes these phenomena particularly valuable from a research perspective is what they might reveal about consciousness itself. If these life forms indeed represent some form of awareness or intelligence, they would constitute evidence for consciousness operating through substrates and systems, radically different from organic biological structures like brains. This would challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of mind and its relationship to physical systems. Indigenous traditions often suggest these light beings have existed in desert regions since long before human arrival, representing ancient presences with deep connections to the landscape. Some traditional knowledge systems include specific protocols for respectful interaction with these entities, treating them as rightful inhabitants rather than supernatural manifestations or anomalies to be explained away. These traditions sometimes suggest that the light beings serve essential functions within desert ecosystems, monitoring environmental conditions, responding to disturbances, or even facilitating communication between different life forms in ways not easily perceptible to human senses. While such claims lie far outside conventional ecological models, the persistence of these beliefs across cultures, with detailed observational knowledge of desert systems, suggests they shouldn't be dismissed without consideration. Scientific interest in these interactive light phenomena has grown in recent years, as advances in quantum biology, complex systems theory, and consciousness studies provide new frameworks for considering non-biological information processing systems. The possibility that awareness might emerge through processes quite different from those we associate with organic life opens new avenues for understanding desert light phenomena without requiring either supernatural explanations or dismissal of consistent witness testimony. For desert travelers hoping to encounter these phenomena, indigenous guides offer consistent advice. Approach with respect rather than fear. Maintain calm and non-threatening demeanor. Avoid sudden movements or loud noises. And most importantly, approach with curiosity and openness rather than predetermined expectations. The light phenomena reportedly interact most extensively with those who demonstrate patience and receptivity rather than attempting to control or direct the encounter. As with many desert mysteries, these light forms remind us that our categories and classifications, living versus non-living, conscious versus non-conscious, natural versus artificial, may be far more fluid and permeable than our conventional thinking acknowledges. The desert, with its stark simplicity and extreme conditions, perhaps allows us to perceive entities and processes that exist at the boundaries of our conceptual frameworks, challenging us to expand our understanding of what forms consciousness might take in the vast spectrum of possibility our universe contains. As the night deepens and sleep perhaps begins to overtake you, let us explore one final aspect of desert mysteries, the profound personal transformations that often accompany extended immersion in these extreme environments. Beyond the specific anomalous phenomena we've discussed, perhaps the deepest desert mystery lies in how these landscapes consistently catalyze life-altering psychological and spiritual experiences across diverse cultural contexts. From religious traditions centered around desert retreats to modern wilderness therapy programs, from ancient vision quest practices to contemporary scientific research on awe and transcendent experience, desert environments have demonstrated remarkable power to restructure human consciousness in ways that participants describe as among the most meaningful experiences of their lives. The desert transformation phenomenon typically includes several distinct characteristics that appear consistently across different cultural frameworks and individual backgrounds. Dissolution of ordinary identity boundaries and expanded sense of self that includes connection to the larger environment. Access to autobiographical memories and psychological material previously unavailable to conscious awareness. Resolution of long-standing internal conflicts or persistent life questions through insights experienced as coming from beyond the individual. Encounters with what participants describe as larger than human intelligence, perceived as emanating from the landscape itself. Radical shifts in life priorities, values, and goals that persist long after return to ordinary environments. Enhanced sensory acuity and pattern recognition that continues for weeks or months following desert immersion. Spontaneous resolutions of physical health issues, particularly stress-related or psychosomatic conditions. What makes these transformative experiences particularly interesting from a research perspective is their consistency across different populations, from indigenous people for whom desert spirituality represents cultural continuity, to modern urban dwellers with no previous connection to arid landscapes, to scientific researchers initially skeptical of transformational claims. The patterns of experience show remarkable similarities, despite wildly different expectational frameworks. Neuroscientific research has begun documenting the brain state changes associated with these desert transformations. Extended exposure to desert environments correlates with increased alpha wave activity, greater coherence between brain hemispheres, enhanced default mode network function, and neurochemical profiles similar to those observed in long-term meditation practitioners, all occurring without deliberate contemplative practice, simply through environmental exposure. What might explain the desert's reliable transformative effect? Several factors appear to work together to create these consciousness shifts. The extreme sensory reduction of desert environments, minimal visual complexity, limited sound inputs, reduced olfactory stimulation may create conditions where the brain's filtering systems relax, allowing awareness to access aspects of reality, typically screened out by ordinary perception. This opening of the filters allows more direct experience of both internal psychological material and subtle external phenomena, normally below the threshold of conscious awareness. The physical challenges of desert survival activate ancient bodily systems evolved for emergency response, including heightened alertness, pattern recognition, and intuitive processing. These activated systems may allow access to bodily knowledge and environmental awareness, normally unavailable to conscious cognition, creating experiences of direct knowing, frequently reported during desert transformations. The desert's vast spatial scale and obvious geological time frame create conditions ideal for what psychologists call awe experiences, encounters with something perceived as vastly larger than the self that require mental schema reorganization. These awe experiences have been shown to decrease self-focus, enhance feelings of connectedness, and improve cognitive flexibility, all key components of transformative experience. The desert's harsh conditions necessitate heightened attention to immediate survival needs, while simultaneously presenting a landscape that evokes contemplation of eternity, creating a unique convergence of immediate bodily awareness and cosmic perspective that many traditions identify as the sweet spot for transforming experience. Indigenous knowledge systems worldwide have developed sophisticated practices for working deliberately with these natural desert effects to facilitate specific types of consciousness transformation. Vision quest protocols, walkabout traditions, and desert retreat practices all share certain key elements: preparation periods that clarify intention and create psychological readiness, threshold rituals marking departure from ordinary reality, extended solitude and carefully selected desert location, minimal provisions creating controlled physical stress, specific attention practices oriented toward environmental communion, emphasis on direct experience rather than conceptual understanding, integration processes upon return to community. Modern wilderness therapy programs have adapted these indigenous approaches into contemporary frameworks, finding them remarkably effective for treating conditions resistant to conventional therapeutic approaches, particularly addiction, PTSD, existential depression, and identity crises. The desert appears to facilitate psychological and spiritual processes that more controlled environments cannot easily catalyze. For those experiencing desert transformation firsthand, perhaps the most common descriptor is remembering. Not acquiring new knowledge, but recognizing something always known, but forgotten in the complexities of modern life. This quality of remembered wisdom, rather than novel insight, appears consistently across diverse accounts, suggesting the desert may be reactivating aspects of human awareness that remain latent in more complicated environments. The transformative effects of desert immersion often persist long after return to ordinary environments, sometimes creating permanent shifts in personality, perception, and life direction. Follow-up studies with wilderness therapy participants show changes in core psychological metrics still detectable years after their desert experiences, suggesting these transformations represent fundamental recalibrations of consciousness rather than temporary altered states. This persistence distinguishes desert transformation from many other consciousness-altering experiences, which often fade quickly upon return to ordinary environments. Something about desert immersion appears to create changes robust enough to withstand re-immersion in conventional reality. Perhaps because the insights gained relate to fundamental existential truths rather than culturally bound interpretations or temporary perceptual alterations. The desert transformation phenomenon raises profound questions about human consciousness and its relationship to environment. If immersion in desert landscapes consistently produces specific types of consciousness change across diverse populations, what might this suggest about the nature of mind itself? Perhaps consciousness is not solely a product of brain function, but represents an interaction between perceiving organisms and their environments, a relationship rather than a self-contained process. This ecological view of consciousness aligns with many indigenous knowledge systems that understand mind as emerging within the relationship between human and landscape, rather than being contained within the individual. From this perspective, different environments would naturally evoke different conscious states by creating distinct relationship patterns between perceiver and perceived. The desert, with its extreme conditions and stark simplicity, may create a particularly powerful context for consciousness transformation, precisely because it strips away complexity and confronts the human organism with fundamental existential parameters: survival, vast space, extended time, and direct exposure to natural forces, undiluted by human modification. In this elemental context, consciousness perhaps returns to its own fundamental nature, temporarily freed from the intricate social and conceptual overlays that typically structure experience. For those considering desert immersion as a transformative experience, traditional wisdom offers consistent guidance. Enter with clear intention, but minimal expectation. Prepare physically, but maintain psychological openness. Respect the landscape as a living presence rather than an inert backdrop. And perhaps most importantly, create space for integration upon return. The desert speaks most clearly to those who listen without demanding specific answers, who allow its teachings to emerge in their own time and form. The transformative power of desert immersion reminds us that consciousness remains fundamentally mysterious, despite our increasing scientific sophistication. These arid landscapes that initially appear empty reveal themselves as anything but, offering not only external phenomena that challenge our understanding of physical reality, but internal journeys that transform our experience of being human. The greatest desert mystery may be not what we discover about the landscape, but what the landscape reveals about ourselves. As our exploration of desert mysteries nears completion, let us examine one final category of phenomena that ties together many threads we've discussed: the desert's remarkable ability to preserve information across vast time spans, functioning as what some researchers have termed environmental memory systems that store and occasionally reveal records of events long past through mechanisms we're only beginning to understand. Beyond the obvious preservation of physical artifacts due to arid conditions, desert environments appear capable of storing and later releasing information through more subtle processes, creating records of past events that manifest through various phenomena ranging from sound and light anomalies to more complex multisensory experiences that witnesses describe as like walking into the past. In the Gobi Desert, researchers investigating unusual acoustic phenomena in 2014 documented what sound engineers termed acoustic palimpsests, layered sound patterns that appeared to contain audio elements from different time periods. Using specialized microphones designed to capture infrasonic and ultrasonic frequencies beyond human hearing, they recorded sound signatures that, when analyzed through spectral decomposition software, revealed distinct layers of acoustic information. What made these recordings particularly remarkable was their content. When slowed down and shifted into audible ranges, certain layers contained what sound analysts identified as human voices speaking ancient Turkic languages, extinct for over 1,000 years, animal sounds from species no longer present in the region, and environmental noises consistent with historical climate conditions rather than present ones. Multiple recording sessions at the same locations captured these acoustic layers consistently, ruling out equipment malfunction or one-time anomalies. The phenomenon appeared strongest near specific geological formations containing high percentages of quartz and certain rare earth elements known to have piezoelectric properties, the ability to convert mechanical energy to electrical signals and vice versa. This discovery prompted a theoretical model suggesting that certain desert mineral formations might function as natural recording devices, capturing sound vibrations through piezoelectric mechanisms and storing them as subtle electromagnetic patterns within crystalline structures. Under specific environmental conditions, particularly during dramatic temperature shifts at dawn and dusk, or during certain geomagnetic fluctuations, these stored patterns might be reconverted to mechanical vibrations, effectively playing back sounds from the past. While highly speculative from a conventional physics perspective, this model aligns with indigenous desert knowledge worldwide. Aboriginal traditions describe specific rock formations as talking stones that contain the voices and stories of ancestors. Bedouin oral histories mention rocks that remember and can be heard speaking after sunset in certain locations. Native American traditions include practices for listening to the stone people to learn about past events. Similar information, preservation has been documented in visual phenomena. Desert researchers have recorded what they term landscape memories, visual manifestations resembling holographic projections that briefly display scenes of past environments or events in specific locations. These visual anomalies typically appear during dawn or dusk transitional periods, last from several seconds to several minutes, and show remarkable internal consistency across multiple witness accounts and recording methods. In Australia's Gibson Desert, a 2016 research project documented over 40 distinct visual memory events at locations traditionally identified by Aboriginal guides as dreaming revelation sites. Using multiple camera systems operating across different spectral ranges, they captured visual phenomena showing landscapes as they would have appeared thousands of years earlier, including water features, now dry, vegetation patterns now changed, and in some cases, human activities from historical or prehistoric periods. Analysis of this visual data revealed several patterns difficult to explain through conventional mechanisms like light refraction or mirage effects. The phenomena maintained consistent internal perspective regardless of viewing angle, contained accurate historical details later verified through archaeological investigation, and showed temporal coherence, depicting scenes that unfolded with appropriate causality in physics rather than random visual elements. Indigenous knowledge systems offer sophisticated conceptual frameworks for understanding these environmental memory phenomena. Many desert cultures worldwide share remarkably similar models of landscape as a living information system, not metaphorically, but literally capable of recording, storing, and revealing information across timescales far exceeding human generations. These traditional knowledge systems often include specific practices for accessing landscape memories, deliberately rather than encountering them by chance. These methods typically involve combinations of location selection based on geological and energetic qualities, timing according to astronomical and seasonal factors, physical positioning of the human body in relation to landscape features, attention training and perceptual preparation, sound-based activation through voice, instruments, or rhythmic movement. What makes these traditional practices particularly interesting from a scientific perspective is their testability. When researchers follow these protocols under guidance from indigenous knowledge keepers, they report significantly higher rates of anomalous information access than control conditions would predict, suggesting these ancient methods may indeed identify replicable conditions under which environmental memory phenomena become accessible. Modern scientific attempts to explain these phenomena have explored several potential mechanisms. Some researchers propose that crystalline structures in desert soils and rocks might preserve information through mechanisms similar to those used in solid-state computer memory, with environmental energies occasionally providing the equivalent of read operations that make this stored data perceptible. Others have suggested quantum-level explanations involving entanglement between particles present during past events and their current counterparts, creating information bridges across time that become accessible under specific conditions of consciousness and environmental factors. While highly speculative, such theories attempt to provide frameworks that might accommodate the observed phenomena without requiring supernatural explanations. Perhaps most promising are research directions, exploring how complex systems like desert ecosystems might develop emergent information processing capabilities over evolutionary timescales. Just as neural networks emerge from collections of individual cells to create memory systems in brains, perhaps landscapes develop distributed information storage and processing capabilities through the complex interactions of geological, biological, electromagnetic, and quantum systems operating across vast timespans. For desert travelers sensitive to these environmental memory phenomena, the experience of accessing such information typically begins with subtle shifts in awareness, a quality of attention described as softer or wider than ordinary perception, often accompanied by slight alterations in auditory processing, where background sounds seem to recede while subtle sounds become more prominent. This perceptual shift sometimes leads to what witnesses describe as information bubbles, localized zones where sensory experience appears to include elements from different time periods simultaneously. These experiences differ from hallucinations in several key aspects. They're typically shared by multiple perceivers. They contain verifiable historical details unknown to the witnesses, and they interact with recording equipment in measurable ways. The desert's role as environmental memory system may help explain why these landscapes have been consistently associated with prophetic and visionary experiences across diverse cultural traditions. If deserts indeed preserve information across time more effectively than other environments, they might naturally facilitate access to knowledge that appears prescient or revealing, not through supernatural means, but through interaction with sophisticated environmental information systems, operating according to principles we're only beginning to understand. This perspective suggests that desert mystics, prophets, and visionaries throughout history may have been individuals particularly sensitive to these environmental information fields, people whose perceptual systems allowed them to access landscape memories and patterns with unusual clarity. Their revelations, rather than representing communications from supernatural entities, might be better understood as perceptual insights into information already present in the desert environment, but typically filtered out by ordinary consciousness. For modern desert explorers interested in experiencing these information fields firsthand, indigenous guides suggest specific approaches that balance respectful relationship with focused intention, rather than attempting to force revelatory experiences or approach with demanding expectations. Traditional wisdom suggests cultivating receptive awareness, a state of alert attentiveness combined with internal quietude that creates optimal conditions for information reception. The desert's environmental memory systems remind us that information storage and processing may not be exclusive to biological brains or human technologies. Perhaps the broader environment itself functions as a vast information system, operating according to principles and timescales we're only beginning to comprehend, a perspective that would fundamentally transform our understanding of both ecology and information science. As our exploration of desert mysteries reaches its conclusion, let us consider how these diverse phenomena might be connected within larger patterns. While we've examined many distinct categories of desert anomalies, from spatial and temporal distortions to intelligent life forms, from environmental memory systems to consciousness transformations, certain common threads emerge that may point toward underlying principles unifying these seemingly separate mysteries. Many desert anomalies appear connected to specific geological features and mineral compositions. Locations with high concentrations of quartz, magnetite, rare earth elements, or radioactive minerals consistently show higher frequencies of reported phenomena across all categories. These minerals share properties related to electromagnetic field generation, piezoelectric effects, and quantum coherence, suggesting these physical characteristics may create conditions where ordinary reality becomes more fluid or permeable. Astronomical alignments represent another common factor across diverse desert phenomena. Many anomalies show strong correlations with specific celestial events, not just obvious cycles like solstices and equinoxes, but more complex alignments involving multiple celestial bodies or galactic features. These correlations suggest that certain cosmic geometries might influence Earth systems in ways that amplify or trigger desert anomalies, perhaps through gravitational effects, radiation patterns, or more speculative influences not yet recognized by conventional science. Water, despite its scarcity in desert environments, appears as a crucial factor in many reported phenomena. Locations with underground aquifers, intermittent water presence, or historical water features show significantly higher anomaly frequencies than completely dry areas. This water connection might relate to its unique electromagnetic properties, its role as boundary layer between geological systems, or its capacity to facilitate certain electrochemical processes within desert soils. Perhaps most significantly, consciousness itself appears as a consistent factor across desert mysteries. The observer's state of awareness, their attention quality, emotional disposition, belief structures, and perceptual flexibility seems to influence not just their subjective experience of desert phenomena, but the objective manifestation of the phenomena themselves, as documented through instrumentation and recording technologies. This consciousness factor suggests desert anomalies may exist at the intersection of external physical reality and human awareness, neither purely objective occurrences independent of observers, nor purely subjective experiences without physical correlates. They may represent a third category of phenomena that emerges precisely within the relationship between consciousness and environment, becoming accessible when that relationship achieves specific qualities of resonance or coherence. Indigenous knowledge systems worldwide have developed sophisticated conceptual frameworks for understanding this intersection between consciousness and landscape. Many desert cultures work with models of reality that don't separate mind from matter or subject from object in the way Western thought typically does. Instead, they understand consciousness and physical reality as mutually creative aspects of a unified process, different expressions of the same fundamental nature, rather than separate categories interacting across an ontological divide. From this perspective, desert mysteries aren't anomalies at all, but revelations of reality's true nature, glimpses of the deeper patterns and possibilities normally hidden by our culturally conditioned perceptual filters and conceptual frameworks. The desert, by stripping away complexity and confronting human consciousness with elemental conditions, perhaps allows us to perceive aspects of reality that remain obscured in more cluttered or complicated environments. For those who have experienced desert mysteries firsthand, this integrative understanding often feels intuitively correct. Many report that their encounters with desert anomalies catalyze not just new beliefs or ideas, but fundamentally different ways of perceiving and relating to reality itself, shifts in consciousness that transform their basic understanding of what the world is and how they participate in it. Modern science, despite its historical tendency toward reductionism, has begun developing theoretical frameworks that might accommodate these more holistic perspectives. Quantum theories of consciousness, integrated information models, and panpsychist approaches all suggest ways that awareness might be fundamental to reality rather than an emergent property of complex systems. These emerging scientific frameworks may eventually provide conceptual bridges between indigenous wisdom and contemporary understanding. As you finally surrender to sleep after this long exploration of desert mysteries, consider that the most profound insight these phenomena offer may be not any specific explanation or conclusion, but a reminder of how vast the unknown remains despite our sophisticated knowledge systems. The desert, with its apparent emptiness and simplicity, paradoxically reveals the boundless depth and complexity of a reality we've only begun to understand. The mysteries we've explored tonight, from moving rocks to intelligent lights, from temporal anomalies to consciousness transformations, invite us into a more humble relationship with knowledge itself. They remind us that understanding requires not just accumulation of facts, but willingness to encounter reality directly. With senses attuned to subtleties our ordinary perception might miss, and minds open to possibilities our conceptual frameworks haven't yet accommodated. Perhaps this is the desert's greatest gift, not answers, but better questions. Not certainty, but a more spacious relationship with mystery. Not fear of the unknown, but reverence for how much remains to be discovered about our world and ourselves. Sleep now, fellow explorer of desert mysteries. May your dreams carry you deeper into the landscapes we've traversed together, not as passive spectator, but as active participant in reality's unfolding wonder. And perhaps when you awaken, some quality of desert consciousness will remain, a clarity of perception, an openness to possibility, a willingness to stand at the edge of known and unknown, with both scientific rigor and spiritual awe. The desert abides, its mysteries endure, and the journey of discovery continues. In your future explorations, in scientific advances yet to come, and in the ancient dialogue between human consciousness and the landscapes that both challenge and reveal it. Whether you ever physically visit these arid lands or simply journey there through knowledge and imagination, may you carry with you the desert's essential teaching. Reality is far more vast, more mysterious, and more alive with possibility than our ordinary perception suggests. And in that vastness lies not reason for fear, but invitation to wonder. The beginning of wisdom that flows from recognizing how much remains unknown despite all we've learned, and how much awaits discovery by those willing to perceive with fresh eyes and open hearts. Good night, and thank you for joining me on this exploration of desert mysteries. May the sands of sleep carry you gently into dreams, as vast and filled with discovery as the desert itself. And remember, sometimes the most important discoveries aren't those we make about the external world, but the inner transformations catalyzed when we encounter mystery with genuine curiosity rather than the need for immediate explanation. The desert has been teaching this wisdom since humans first encountered its harsh magnificence, and it continues to teach it today to anyone willing to listen to the whispers in the sand. As you drift towards sleep, perhaps those whispers follow you into dreams, carrying ancient knowledge that speaks not in words, but in the language of direct experience, the knowing that comes when perception opens beyond its ordinary boundaries to encounter reality's deeper currents. Sleep well, wanderer in the mysteries of existence, until we meet again in some other exploration of the unknown. May your journey be filled with both the clear light of understanding and the sacred darkness of questions that open rather than close. Questions that invite you ever deeper into the beautiful mystery that surrounds us always, whether we notice it or not. For the desert teaches us finally that the greatest mysteries may not be those we solve, but those we learn to live within. The questions that become not obstacles to understanding, but doorways to deeper participation in a reality, always more complex, more beautiful, and more alive than our explanations can capture. In that participation, rather than mere explanation, we may find what human hearts have always sought in the desert's vast expanses. Not final answers, but deeper belonging to the mystery that holds us all. Good night, and may the desert's timeless wisdom guide your dreams tonight and your waking hours and days to come. Thank you for joining me in these 3+ hours of desert mysteries, a journey not through fear, but wonder, not through sensation, but meaning, inviting us to remember how extraordinary existence itself truly is. When we approach it with eyes and hearts open to the mysteries, it continually unfolds before us. Sleep now, with the desert's ancient silence accompanying you into dreams. The journey continues, the mystery endures, and somewhere in that vast, starlit expanse, something ancient and aware, perhaps dreams of us as well, wondering what we might become when we finally learn to listen to the wisdom whispered by the wind and sand, wisdom older than human memory, yet somehow always speaking directly to the deepest questions of our hearts. Good night, fellow explorers of the great mystery of existence. Until we meet again, may the peace of starlit deserts fill your dreams, and the courage of desert journeyers guide your waking hours. For we are all, in our own ways, travelers through landscapes, both external and internal, seeking to understand not just the world around us, but our place within it, a quest the desert has witnessed countless times before, silent witness to humanity's enduring search for meaning in a universe vast beyond comprehension, yet somehow intimately connected to our own wondering hearts. The desert knows, the desert remembers, the desert waits for those ready to listen, and now, perhaps, so do you.